Good morning. I will now call this Valentine's Day meeting for February 14th, 2023 to order, work session to order. We'll start by reading our Who Are We statement. We are the Polk County Leadership Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to define us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and experiences to ensure that our decisions are focused on providing high-quality education for all students. The four most important things to our governance team are operating with integrity, respecting our students, staff, families, and each other, establishing a culture where our stakeholders feel valued, supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth, and supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children we serve and find avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There is no acceptable alternative. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for each student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because we will remain committed to supporting the whole child. We hope to engage and empower our students and stakeholders to create a community of lifelong learners. And with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Hyde.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, staff, and community members. Thank you for being here this morning. I know many of you are grateful that this is only a workshop and we do not have to go into an actual school board meeting this evening. So gentlemen, you're still on the hook for Valentine's Day dinner and celebrations with your wives. I know I am, and I want to wish my wife a very happy Valentine's Day. Our first two guests with us this morning has been consistent with our policy. We've been inviting our community-based partners in to share and basically get some free marketing so that our community knows about the extensive number of partnerships we have in our community. We have, and I think you've seen to date, so many, the variety, I should say, of opportunities and partnerships that we have established is quite impressive. So no matter what interests our students have or their families have, we have faith-based partners, we have partners like you're going to hear today, who really go above and beyond to support our students. We have tutoring, we have all kinds of intervention services, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. I mean, it's quite extensive. And so as you know, we're capturing all of these, and they'll be housed on a section of our website as we reach out and fulfill our goals and objectives for our strategic plan for engaging our families and community members so that they know what all these opportunities are. And as we get closer to the end of the school year, hard to believe, many of our families will be using this information to make important decisions about types of camps and programs for summer for their children to participate in. So it's my pleasure this morning, as a scout myself, and I was not a Girl Scout, I was a Boy Scout. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce this morning, we have Rebecca Brown, Chief Operating Officer from the Girl Scouts of, was it West Central Florida? That's what I thought, okay. And then are you joined by Michelle Patton as well?
So I'm Michelle. Rebecca,
okay,
unfortunately, isn't feeling well, so she wasn't able to make the drive over from Tampa, but I live here in Lakeland, so I'm going to present on our behalf.
Thank you for being here, and the floor
Absolutely.
is yours. Board members will either ask questions, they'll save their questions for the end, and I'll manage the speakers list, so just look to me, and then individual board members may have either praise or questions or comments for you, okay? Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Really happy to be here and be a part of your strategic plan. Today we're going to talk about Girl Scouts and what we're doing to build girls of courage, confidence, and character here in Polk County. Our agenda is just to review our Girl Scout model and outcomes and talk about our presence here in Polk County and discuss some potential partnerships and how we can increase Polk County families at our upcoming STEMapalooza, increase Girl Scout engagement at schools to promote improved student outcomes and increased family engagement, and increase awareness to families in Polk County about this amazing program, and we'll have some time at the end for wrap-up and questions. Girl Scouts' mission is long, strong, and proud, 110 years. Girl Scouts build girls of courage, confidence, character who make the world a better place. And how do we do that? Our outcomes, through our programs and initiatives, through STEM, outdoor, learning life skills, and our entrepreneurship programs, our girls learn a sense of self, positive values, challenge seeking, building healthy relationships, and community problem solving. So what is the Girl Scout leadership experience? Our evidence-based model describes what girls do in Girl Scouts, who they do it with, how they do it, and how they benefit. This is our model for the high value leadership experience that we want for all of our girls. Through a variety of activities with supportive relationships, going through our girl-led cooperative learning and learn by doing processes, we expect all girls to have the same outcomes, coming out with a strong sense of self, positive values, again, challenge seeking, building healthy relationships, and of course, looking at our community problems to help solve those. Currently, we have 1,376 Girl Scouts currently registered across Polk County. A map of the schools that we have here in Polk County, I'm sure you're familiar with. We have 1,000 of those girls are in volunteer-led troops and almost 400 in our community-based troops. We've got some pictures we wanted to point out, we wanted to show to the board. These are the girls that are doing things to give back to the community, looking at problems in the community and what they can do to solve those problems and the positive impact that they can make. Anything from taking the cookie boxes from the 1,000 cases of cookies they picked up and sold through their entrepreneur program and turning it into scratching posts for cats in shelters and whatnot, making survival bags for the homeless, working in food kitchens. But then again, we also have our girls having those leadership experiences either through STEM or the Flying High Circus event where they're courageous and brave, having age-appropriate activities for our middle and high school girls to visit Sun and Fun, Skylab, all these wonderful partnerships that we're lucky to have here in Polk County. Data shows that having Girl Scouts in schools boosts family engagement in our students' education, it improves their academic outcomes, it improves their attendance, and it improves their social skills, thus improving the overall climate in the schools. We partner through a grant from United Way of Central Florida, and through their DIME system that you're familiar with that helps us tabulate and really put a number to our outcomes. Instead of it makes us feel good, what is it really doing? And through those outcomes and using the DIME system, we know that Girl Scouts in schools help our girls, they have better attendance, higher FSA scores, higher STAR reading and math, and they also perform better on a daily basis with fewer referrals as well. So we have the data that proves that these programs, although they're not tutoring, still have a positive academic impact on our girls. So how can girls participate in Girl Scouts? We have our community partner troops, which are troop meetings led by our staff members and partner volunteers. They're often free to girls. They can happen during the school day or at one of our after-school programs like PACE, Boys and Girls Club. The volunteer-led troops, because volunteers make the world go around in Girl Scouts, we have troop meetings led by parent and neighborhood volunteers. They can occur on a school or on a community-based site, usually funded by the participants, although we do have funding for those who need it. Currently, the list you see is our school year troops in the recreation clubs, Boys and Girls Clubs, but also inside the schools. We're really very happy to get our troops started back up at Crystal Lake, and congratulations to you all for that accreditation. I know that's something that we can all be very proud of. But we also have some room to grow. We lost some numbers during COVID, like a lot of other agencies, and we really are putting the investment in to bring those numbers back up. And in pink are the schools that we're working to get into currently. And these are funded by a grant from United Way of Central Florida, which is evidence-based grant, the Florida Department of Education, and Girl Scouts of West Central Florida. STEMapalooza is coming up on April 15th. It's tax day, and we're partnered with Florida Polytech to host again. Last year we had 1,300 attendees, and really we're trying to spark that love for STEM in children early in their academic careers. It was hosted at Florida Polytech. It included hands-on activities, a university tour, and a Women in STEM panel. So how can we grow our partnerships and collective impact in our Polk County schools? Some of the things I would like to bring to you all to consider as you move forward, and also to put out there for our parents using this as a reference. We would really like the opportunity to bring 100 more kindergarten girls to STEMapalooza, planting the seeds of love for STEM early, giving them that tactile opportunity, and also looking at that beautiful campus and thinking of what they want to be. Create more school-based Girl Scout community troops at 3 more elementary schools this year, engaging at least 100 more girls and families. And we really want to push forward the initiative to increase our older girl participation and get more middle school girls involved in Girl Scouting troops, thus supporting an improved school climate and student engagement. We've got a long history, and we're very proud of that with our traditional values. We have community partners that we're very proud to work with here in Polk County. Of course, you are considered one of our partners, and we appreciate your continued support. PACE Center for Girls, the Early Learning Coalition, United Way of Central Florida, Florida Polytech, the Boys and Girls Club, City of Frostproof, and the Polk Education Foundation. One of the things that United Way of Central Florida, which is based out of Tampa, serving 8 counties, has done to really improve and put a focus on Polk County and all of the wonderful resources that we have here and the students, the opportunity for growth is adding more leadership based here in Polk County. So you have myself, I'm the regional vice president. I started with United Way in January after retiring from 20 years of service with Public Supermarkets. I have 2 full-time community managers who help support the service units. And then joined with me today is Taylor Mills. I'm going to say hi. Taylor started with us the end of last year. She's a full-time program coordinator, and her job is to deliver those programs inside the schools. And then we also have 2 part-time program coordinators who deliver programs throughout Polk County. Questions and discussion. How can we continue to be a part of your strategic plans, and what can we do to build this relationship, deliver programs in more of our schools, and communicate the opportunities that girls have here in Polk County?
Board Member Sharpless.
So first, I want to say, as an Eagle Scout myself, I know the value that scouting can bring to a community and to the participants. So I want to thank you first for partnering with Polk County Public Schools and having some of your troops in our schools, specifically helping our young females get into the STEM and get excited about STEM. I think it's a huge advantage that Girl Scouts brings to our school system. I'm also really happy to see that on that list of schools, there's quite a few schools from my district there, so I'm very proud of that. And one final thing, I got to tell you, this week I bought some Girl Scout cookies. Delicious. So make sure you're all going out there and support these Girl Scouts.
Rebecca was supposed to bring the cookies, so of course I had to text her, and I'm like, you're going to send me into this school board meeting without any cookies. Having been with Publix for 20 years and bleeding green, a lot of my cohorts were really surprised that I was joining Girl Scouts. And one of the things that I really like about Girl Scouts is that they're data driven. We do things that feel good, but we are making decisions based on data. So when you're talking about the schools and the schools that we're targeting in pink, that's based on financial data, personas, what kind of experience do those communities want? Because the one thing we know about Polk County is it's huge and it's diverse. So, you know, the Girl Scout troop that wants to do a lot of STEM and they want to do glamping might not be the same as the troops that I met last night in the northeast part of the region that want to do more. They want to do more camping, and they want to have like camp, like they want to have a contest to see who can pitch their tent the fastest. You know, so we have that large diversity, and we've got the numbers to support creating troops that are girl-led. So that was one of the things that really inspired me to make this change and to make a commitment to Girl Scouts and, you know, building that presence back.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that we're looking at middle school. I think that's important. And I learned that you don't have to start at the beginning. And so middle schoolers can go into Girl Scouts without being a brownie or going through all the stages. And I think that's going to be important to share that message, that this is available to all students. And you might find we have a lot of students who will be new to this and never had the experience of Girl Scout or even knew they could be. So it's exciting to see us reach out to our middle schools.
Thank you. I appreciate that. it's something about community. It's the uniform. So in our community-based troops, they're allowed uniforms, and those uniforms are provided for them, often at no cost to them. It's something about, like my pen, it makes me feel special. That uniform makes it, we know when we made the decision to put uniforms in schools, it brings everybody closer together and it takes those boundaries down. And we really want to do that for our middle school girls as well, because if you feel like you belong to something, then you're going to have that community-minded spirit.
Thank you.
There are no more questions. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your all time. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to bring up Ms. Jennifer Fasking and Chelsea Gross, who are here with us from State Farm Insurance.
Good morning. I am Jennifer Fasking, and my partner in crime,
Chelsea Gross.
For over 100 years, State Farm has been in business, and for just about that long, State Farm, the agents and associates have been working to give back in our communities. Right now, State Farm's focus aligns with safety, education, and community development specifically. Today, though, we really want to talk about how the local associates have been partnering with Polk County Public Schools. Before COVID and before we no longer had a building in the city of Winter Haven, we created a group of people that were designed to lead where we live. And when we have over 2,000 employees in the state of Florida, a vast majority kind of located in this central Florida area, we have a lot of people who like to give back to the community. So our Lead Where You Live group helps connect those opportunities with the people that are looking for them. And as I mentioned, we don't have a building anymore, but we do have associates who love to connect and contribute. We've been able to leverage internal social media and emails and really just the ideas and creativity of our employees to help start some of these ideas. But one of our favorites is partnering with the Polk County Public Schools, but we do also partner with several other organizations, the Mission, Heart Walk, Kids Pack, Salvation Army, and we work on different things. So sometimes it is donating funds, sometimes it's donating time, other times it might be donating goods and services. But by far our favorite and our associates' favorite is working with the schools, specifically on beautification projects. This came from a conversation with Steve Warner a few years back, really looking at how can we leverage State Farm resources and the benefits that the organization provides associates with our schools. And to date, we have been able to work on 7 beautification projects with 528 hours of 132 employees' time and give back grants of over $5,000. How does that work? Well, State Farm provides every associate a community service and education support day, which is otherwise known as paid time off to go do really good things in the community, and also Good Neighbor grants. So if an individual or a team of individuals contributes 40 hours towards an organization, they can apply for a $500 grant. So each of those 7 opportunities, and you can see the list that we have worked on so far since 2020, took a lot of organization. Steve connected with the schools, worked on what the beautification or the landscape plan would be, looked at how can we find materials at a good cost, connected with us, we got the resources together and showed up. And on any project, we had between 10 and up to 30 people participating on beautifying. And then after the fact, we follow up with a grant request, either 1 or 2, depending on the size of the project or the number of employees involved. So $500 and in some cases $1,000. Here's a couple of our pictures. We're very proud. You can see we show up in our red. We show up happy to work, happy to help, and we get dirty. It is hot and it is sometimes muddy work. And I highly recommend that, and I have to give a huge shout out to Steve, because when we are completing these projects, he is there elbow deep in the mud, digging holes, pitching mulch, and all of that good stuff. So really, really appreciate his effort and his connection with us. And I'll turn it over to Chelsea because we have some other fun stuff we do.
So first of all, just thank you, before I get started on my part, just thank you for having us today. Talking about what our employees do in the community is such a joy for Jennifer and I. We get to do it often, and so thank you for having us. We're just here representing the very many State Farm employees that exist. Certainly we could not do it without them and your partnership. And so not only the beautification projects and the things that Jennifer's already talked about, but we really have done back to school drives. And so when you think about when we went to COVID, we were doing a lot of like in-person activities, trying to keep our employees engaged. And our employees have this really strong drive to give back. And so those back to school drives are such an easy way to virtually support. So we do have a huge part of our population is here in Polk County, really mostly Winter Haven and Lakeland area. But this gives the entire state an opportunity to give back, and we're able to do this through Amazon wish lists. We've really streamlined the process. The easier it is, the more likely people are to give. We know that. And so we've been able to donate over 530 items and over $500 to supply students and teachers with Polk County. Additionally, specifically schools, Johnson Ively Elementary, we did 190 school supply kits and 120 backpacks. Westwood Middle, this was really exciting because we got to provide khakis, which, you know, Jake and his khakis. So we got to donate 100 pair of khaki pants for their clothes closet. That was really exciting. And then Juanita Elementary, 120 backpacks. And so here are some photos, and you can see Steve's peeking out there. He's an honorary State Farmer at this point, I think. And so, you know, our khakis and the kids, and that's who we do it for. I mean, we love to give, it fills our hearts, but we also know that we're extremely blessed to be able to do this for the school. Before I end, I also want to just tell you, our corporate office supports locally as well through, we've donated over $25,000 to the Winter Haven Chamber to support scholarships in the community for our students. Additionally, even though we have closed our physical presence, we're hiring here. So State Farm has chosen Florida as a great place to grow. And so we have added over 1,000 employees in the state of Florida over the last year. I actually recently changed jobs, and at the time there was nobody in my department other than me, and now I have over 1,000 employees that work in my department in Florida that we have hired. And so just thank you for making this a great place to live, a great place to work, and a great place to partner.
Thank you very much. Board members, I'm looking at the speakers list. I don't see any speakers or, oh. Ms. Miller.
Don't forget me, Superintendent. So I just want to say, as someone who's raised on State Farm, both of my parents, over 40 years, retired from that regional office. My sister's an agent. My other sister is working from home now with State Farm. The community involvement has been forever. I remember going to events like this as the shirts change with the different logos. And that bear, I think, is the same costume, so they might want to check into that because I remember him from the 80s. But I'm glad you mentioned the scholarships, because that's something I think that people don't realize, that the scholarships that were available through State Farm, not just for the employees' children, but to the community. My question is, now that there's not a building with the people in it, do you find reaching out to the ones who are working from home, there's more interest, or is that a challenge to get more people interested in the different projects that you do? Because I would think it's a challenge that people are under the same roof, but I'm learning that the new way of operating is remotely.
I'll take that one. I think it really is individual. So I know for working from home for some people is like the greatest joy that's ever happened. For me personally, I miss interaction, like I miss people. And so volunteering in the community is such an amazing way for us to be able to get together. For those who are really, you spend more time with your coworkers than you sometimes do with your family, and especially when we were in the office. So for those who miss that interaction, I think we've really been talking about this as we recruit people, is it can be work from home, but you still have a family, you still have a community, you still have the support system. And so I think it's a good balance for us to be able to support those who want that personal interaction, while also those who would prefer to not see their coworkers every day.
But I love your take on that. I think that's important. So you're not isolated. You're still, that's how you're involving community.
And each week on Wednesdays, we have an internal, it's called our Yammer site. It's like a social media site for State Farm. And we have one that's unique to the state of Florida, and we call it We Care Wednesday. And so we will advertise the things that we are doing in the community. We'll advertise the opportunities that are available and give people opportunities to sign up and or donate. And so they know it's coming on Wednesday, and we get a lot of positive feedback on that too.
Well, thanks for being our good neighbors.
Chair Wyatt?
I just wanted to say thank you. Obviously, we get to see you a lot in the Winter Haven area, but we always appreciate all that you do. And those State Farm scholarships will be opening up for Winter Haven students this month. So have a look, keep your eye out for those. But thank you guys for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies. Great job.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, next up is going to be an internal audit presentation conducted by Carol Matthews, Senior Director of Internal Audit Services. And also for the board members and for Chair, at approximately 10:17, we will pause for a moment of silence in honor of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and the victims of that tragic event. That is a statewide activity that's taking place today. Flags are at half-mast as ordered by the governor late last evening. And so I just want to make sure I apprised you of that. So if I have to interrupt Ms. Matthews or anyone else during the presentation, just be aware that I'm not being rude. I'm just being respectful. So thank you very much. And you are not Ms. Matthews.
I'm not, but I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Christensen. I'm a partner with Carr, Riggs & Ingram, and we audit the internal funds. And so I work with Carol, but I'm going to come up here and present our audit for this past year. And is my PowerPoint, do I need it? There we go. And what I'm going to do is give a brief overview of the financial statements. And so again, this audit that we conducted was for the internal funds. And so the internal funds are the money that students raise within the schools. So it would be for your field trips, for your fundraisers, for your prom tickets. And so there's no money from the state of Florida. This is all money raised by the students and spent on the students. Then I'm going to go a little bit into our audit process and some of the recommendations that we have for the schools, and then some of the recommendations that we had district-wide. Looking at the financial statements this year, you could see we had assets of about $11.7 million and liabilities $145,000, and that's normal for the liabilities to be a small number because at June 30th, the schools are out. There's not quite as much activity going on in internal funds, so usually all the bills are paid by the time June 30 rolls around. Our additions this year was 10.7, almost $10.8 million. And the money going back out, or the deductions, was 9.7. And if you compare that to 2021, you can see the numbers increase significantly, and that's purely due to COVID. If we go back to 2020, we would see that the revenue was about 11 million. And then if you go back to the year before, it was about 13 million. So we did have quite a decrease during COVID because a lot of those activities I mentioned before, the field trips, the fundraisers, they either came to a halt or they decreased significantly. So now we're starting to see the amounts come back up, and we're seeing the activity get a little back to those pre-COVID times. The other thing I wanted to point out is with internal funds, a little different than if a company, a for-profit company, or even your personal finances, when it comes to internal funds, we want to raise that money and we want to spend it in the same year. So when you look at the additions and the deductions, you want those numbers to be approximately the same thing. And so during COVID and before, you could see the money being spent. When we came out of COVID, I've noticed this with all my school districts, they're going back to raising the money a little slower on spending it, and I think that's just being cautious because of coming back out of that time where they weren't able to raise a lot of money. So nothing alarming here, but as we go on, we'll expect to kind of monitor that and make sure that the schools are spending the money that they raise, because those students that raised it, it should be spent on those same students. Our report was unmodified, which means we had a clean audit opinion. And as far as audit adjustments, the only adjustments that we had related to accounts receivable, adjusting the accounts receivable, and also the allowance for doubtful accounts. And the adjustment for the allowance for doubtful accounts is likely going to be something we do every year, only because the district's policy's a little different than when we come in and do the audit. We're looking at any accounts that are over a year old, and these are amounts that are owed to the career centers for tuition. And anything over a year old, we're asking the district to look at that and allow it, because the chances of it being collected after a year, probably is pretty low. And so we record that allowance based on management's estimate during the audit. But for purposes of internal purposes for the district, they need to keep those receivables on the books, and they keep them on for a couple years, and then they have to present them to the board before they can actually write them off. And so it's just kind of a difference in timing. As far as our footnotes, no real high-risk footnotes or anything significant. I wanted to point out the investments. We didn't have any type of concentration, so anytime we have more than 5% of our investments in one type of investment, we would disclose that, but we didn't have any of that this year. Everything was pretty diversified. There are a couple things that I'm required by my professional standards to communicate to those charged with governance, which would be the school board. And that would be things like if we had any disagreements with management, which we did not have any. That would be disagreements on accounting principles, how to apply them, when to apply them, any difficulties encountered in the audit, and we did not have any of those. And if we were aware of any consultations that the district had with other accountants on accounting issues, and we're not aware of any of those occurring. We're also required to communicate if we were to come across any fraud or illegal acts during the audit that were material to the financial statements, and we did not come across any of those types of matters. And I always like to kind of stop at this part and mention this audit is definitely a collaborative effort. There are many different people involved. The finance and accounting department, with Heather and Luke and their team, they pull lots and lots and lots of invoices for us, lots of information when we come out here. We also work with internal audit, Carol and her team, to kind of identify where those risk areas are to make sure that we're performing adequate tests on them. And then we also work with the schools. We have to contact the schools at the beginning of the audit. They send us some information. And then after the audit, we actually have an exit conference with each principal and financial secretary to go over our preliminary findings so that we can have a discussion and see if there's anything additional that they want to send us to maybe clear some of those findings before we get to our final report. So I always like to say thank you. It all works. Sometimes at the beginning I think, how are we going to do this with 150 different sites? But it works, and that's because of everybody doing their part. As far as the school testing, we do testing. We do perform testing at 100% of schools and any departments that have activity in their internal funds. Some departments do have internal funds, so if there's activity, we're testing them that year. So we perform compliance tests on a lot of different areas. You can see them on the slide. And so this compliance testing is looking at rules that they have. The state of Florida, the state of Florida Department of Education has a red book. They have a chapter on internal funds with rules, school board rules, and internal fund, the internal fund manual that Polk County Schools has. And so we go through and we perform a lot of different testing. We pick a sample at each school, and so because we're picking a sample and we can't look at everything, if we come across any sample where there was a rule that wasn't followed, so an example would be if a deposit's made into the bank timely, and if it's not made into the bank timely, then that school gets a finding. So for every item we see, and if they had 2 deposits that weren't made timely, they get 2 findings. And I just like to explain that so that when we go over the numbers, you'll understand how that works with the findings. So here we have a chart that shows the average findings per school or department, and we had 146 schools and departments this year that had activity in the internal funds. And you can see the line's pretty steady year to year. It did dip down in 2021. I've seen that at every district I go to, and that's because of the activity decreasing because of COVID. So we didn't have the fundraisers as much as we did pre-COVID. And so, of course, some of those rules, the forms you have to fill out, the reports that have to be reviewed and signed, that all decreased also because the activity wasn't there. In 2022, it went up to about 0.88 findings per school or department. And so that did increase, and it increased a little higher than what it was at pre-COVID. And some of that's due to, we may have one or two schools where they just had a higher number of findings. We have, if we have one where there's a new employee that comes in and maybe didn't know one of the rules, and so every sample we looked at, maybe they didn't pass that one rule, that kind of skewed the numbers this year. I expect that to go back down where it's going to be closer to that 0.8 next year. Here we just have a breakdown of the number of findings that each school had. And so if you look, we had just short of about 90% of our schools had 2 or less findings. And so that's great. That's consistent with prior years. And what I mentioned before, if you go down, you'll see 5 or more findings. We had 4 schools. And again, that's consistent because you're going to have those schools, especially we had after COVID, we may have schools where a financial secretary is taking a leave of absence or may be out. And although there's procedures for someone to take over those roles when somebody's out, it's still, there could be some things that maybe don't always happen as timely when the financial secretary is not there. So it's those special cases. But every year when you have 150, you're going to have a couple where there's something like that where they're going to have some extra findings. Here are some of the more common findings that we had, and this is just for your review. And this is something that Carol Matthews tracks on her own, and goes through them. And these are the areas that we like to talk about and make sure that the financial secretaries and the principals and the schools are being educated on some of these rules to make sure, because there is going to be high turnover at schools in that financial secretary role. Again, I see that at every school district I work with. And so it's that training that we want to make sure we stay on top of and train, the new people when those positions turn over. This is, I know, a small graph, but it's just something for, yes.
Clarification, if you go back one slide, please.
Yes.
So when you look at this number, unlike the slide you did, number 8, is there a way for me to get a copy of this? So when you say 21 deposit slips were not dated, I'd like to know how many of those events were related to a particular school. So much to, like as you pointed out previously, 5 of those could be related to one school.
Yes.
And so that's where we need to focus our effort on training and support. So is there a way for me to get that data after the
I can
fact?
give you that data, and I can tell you that is the situation for
figured.
that one in particular. And
But I think that's important for the
We've talked
community and
about
the
that.
board to hear as well, is that 21 schools did not have individual instances of deposits. This could be 2 schools, it could be 1 school, it could be 21, but
It
thank
could
you for
be,
clarifying.
And that's exactly why I wanted to explain ahead the sampling process and how every time we come across an exception, it's going to be on this number. So you're correct, it's not 21 schools. It's just a small handful.
And I'll forward that information to the board. Thank you.
So here is just more of a visual for you to look at, and there are different findings that we had, and it shows how many times it occurred. This year, the gold or yellow bar compared to the light blue and the dark blue, which would be the 2 previous years. And that's more just for you to be able to see if there's any kind of trends. And for some, there are going to be trends, and for some, it's not. It's going to be luck of the draw of what we sampled. When we go through, we have all transactions for the year, and we have a software that just randomly selects samples for us to look at. So sometimes it could be luck of the draw, or there could be something more, like we mentioned, the deposit slip's not dated, and that is something that we did look into and talk to the district about. Now, these are the district-wide recommendations that we had, and so one that we did have that was a significant deficiency. So just to kind of explain the 3 levels of internal control matters that we have, the top level would be a material weakness, and that's where there could be a material misstatement in the financial statements and it not be detected because of a lack of controls. We didn't have any of those for Polk County Schools. The next level down would be a significant deficiency, and what that is there could be a misstatement in the financial statements because of a lack of controls, but it's not going to be material. It's something that's going to be small, but we feel like this is important enough to bring to the attention of the district, and that's where this finding falls in. And then the bottom one is going to be just recommendations more, and we'll get into those in a second. So the one significant deficiency we had is that, this is with the technical colleges, with the receivables. We had, in 2021, when we came out to do the audit, we had 6 out of the 11 invoices that we pulled were, should have been voided. They were students that registered for a class but ended up never attending, and so they should have been voided, but they weren't voided, so they were showing as being outstanding. So last year, we had a finding for that. And then this year, the 6 that had not been voided last year, I went ahead and looked at those again this year because I wanted to see if they had been voided. And 3 of them had, and 3 of them had still remained on the list of amounts that were owed to the district. And so because it was something that I was following up on last year, I needed to go ahead and include that as a significant deficiency. So I just want to, whenever we do have a comment like this, we do ask management to give a response. And I felt like it was important enough because there were a couple different factors to put it in here so that you can read through the district's response. And part of it is, really, there was some key turnover of staff where one, there was some miscommunication. One thought that the other had voided the receipt and then the invoice, and then the other thought that they had voided it. And so I think some miscommunication, also just some other things going on in the technical school colleges that year. But they have started having monthly in-person meetings to train everyone to make sure, because that was one key last year we talked about, is it was if a student registers and then they don't attend class, how is that being communicated to the accounting department at the technical colleges? And so that's something they're working on, is making sure there's training so that they are communicating among departments so that they know if there's students that don't attend class, if they drop out before school starts, then they know to remove or avoid those invoices. Also, something that they're doing is contracting with a new collections agent. That's for collecting the invoices that are valid invoices. They're going to be working on that so that they can make sure they can collect more timely and have a higher collection percentage. The other, as I mentioned, we had recommendations, improvement points, we call them. And so these aren't internal control deficiencies. They're just things we came across that we thought, hey, this is something that you might want to consider. And so the first one is the internal funds policy manual. We had talked about this last year. And unfortunately, the plan was to update the manual during this past school year, but again, with some changes in management and some turnover in certain roles, that wasn't accomplished. But talking to them, that is definitely something that they have on the agenda for this year, this school year. They're going to go through and update the manual. And that's just to make sure that it adheres with some of the new rules that have passed. And, if the manual is, quite a few number of years old, we want to make sure that with the change in how procedures are being done, with things maybe being more electronic than they were, we want to make sure the manual is also updated so that when we do have these new financial secretaries, they're going to get training, but then once they're on the job doing the work, they can go back and refer to a manual if they have questions. And then the other recommendation we had was to complete an IT risk assessment on a regular basis. This was something that was done in the past. When COVID happened, they weren't able to do the IT risk assessment just due to there were certain things that have to be done on site where servers are, and they weren't able to do that during COVID. They weren't able to get access to those locations. But now that that all of that is open again, we recommend that they go back to looking at it. Before it was done every 3 years, we just recommend that it's done periodically. So if they can go back to that policy, that'd be great. And that's something that the IT department had stated that in the 23-24 school year, they are going to be going through an IT risk assessment. Again, I just wanted to mention no material weaknesses were noted, so no weaknesses in internal control where they could result in a material misstatement to the financial statements. Any questions, comments?
Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I appreciate that you mentioned training of the financial secretaries. I think we talked about that last time you were here and how important that was. And this might be a staff question or a superintendent question.
That's ongoing.
Well, I didn't even ask it.
I know.
because even as staff changes, there has to be procedures in place to prevent these things. Do you have, I know, can you believe he does that? The samplings that you show, the repeat findings, superintendent, what is the training or plan? I don't know if this comes from your finance department to address some of those, multi-year repeat findings. What are we doing to address those?
So specifically, Ms. Jenkins has been meeting, her and her team have been meeting with all of the financial staff from the school, at the school level, to address these deficiencies and to make sure that they're fully trained on the proper protocol and procedures. As was noted, there are very few findings out of 151 traditional public schools. To have so few findings is, I'm not concerned. I'm concerned that we make sure that we identify the individuals who are having or making those mistakes so that we can adequately support them and train them to prevent them in the future. But again, there were no material findings. So I think by and large, the system works. Ms. Jenkins did, as based off last year's findings, ramp up trainings this year. I will have a follow-up conversation with Mr. Cochran to find out exactly what's going on. While respectfully, I understand some of the challenges at those sites, I do not understand how a simple handful of students could not have been rectified in a timely manner over the last 18 months since the last finding. Additionally, I mean, the other finding that was significant was the internal manual. So as far from our perspective, part of our issue is a lot of this information resides on the hub. The problem is it is not there. We lack a cohesiveness on the hub. If you go there, some content is actually captured under departments. Other content is captured under specific topics or documents. And so we are going through the process now, and I see my staff in the back nodding their heads. We're going through the process now of pulling all that information into one consistent location that's searchable so that everyone will have access to that. So there will be an internal manual for individuals moving forward.
I think that's great progress. The only thing I did, the fact that that was a sampling, and you went back and looked at the 3, you found 3 that had not changed at that technical school. When you find that, do you do additional sampling?
We did last year because
Okay.
that was when we initially came up with a couple of them. Then we did extend the sample, and so the numbers I showed were for the original sample. I did not, this year I had to pick new invoices to look at, and I didn't have any of those where we had issues with them, with any of the new
So maybe that's where
invoices.
they're making the progress. Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Allen?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the presentation and your findings. Going back to your average findings per school and department, I did see we had an uptick in internal accounts. I think my question or inquiry here is, do you factor in how many more transactions there would be within a particular account? And I think the rationale in that question is the increase in our student population, which would then, I would assume at that point, increase the amount of transactions per account. So then does the sample ratio, does it increase with the increase of transactions?
That's a good question. Our sample sizes are all based on the type of school, elementary, middle, middle, high. And so, but that is something that I will, at a minimum, put a note in where I can maybe display a different graph next year that takes takes the population into consideration, because I think that's a good point, that to be able to show the school board that we could have an increase in findings, but we could also have an increase in population, which is likely going to be an increase in the number of transactions at that school. Definitely, I can do that.
Thank you.
There are no further questions from the board. I have one follow-up question. I'm looking to the back to Ms. Jenkins. If she could make her way up front, I want to make sure she has an opportunity to address this. One of the areas you pointed out, and I'll look specifically at slide number 3, was the volume or the amount of money that's brought in versus the amount of money that's spent. There appears to be well over $1 million that's left over in this year's account versus a much smaller roughly $40,000 that was left over in last year's account. Ms. Jenkins, Heather, when schools have that much money left over in their internal account, do we require them to identify where those funds are stated to be spent?
Yes, sir. When the funds are collected, they have a specific purpose for which they're to be spent. And what we've run across over the last couple of years is when field trips were scheduled and they were prohibited or prevented because of COVID, then those dollars remain. Those dollars can't typically be used for other students to take a field trip. So we have a process to go through and review how the dollars were intended to be spent.
Or issue refunds? if
Yes,
need
sir.
be. Okay, thank you, that clarifies it. Can they, I'm sorry, Heather, if I can, just one more clarification. If I paid for a field trip and I can't take it, can I apply that elsewhere? Can I apply it to a yearbook fee? Can I apply it to graduation? Can I apply it to prom?
It could. We would have to re-obtain permission. So if the school had a fund and they wanted to use it for yearbooks, they would contact those individuals that had originally given the funds and restate that it was to be redirected to a yearbook.
And I'll ask our presenter, does that create additional findings as a result, or is that going to make your life difficult if we were to do that?
No, it would, if anything, it would probably make the school's life a little more difficult to having to gather all that information. It maybe would be easier to do the refund and then have them repay, but no, as long as we understand that these things happen, and as long as they have the documentation to show that they got approval to use that money elsewhere from the person who originally gave them the money, then that's fine.
Yeah, I'm accustomed to schools having a cap on their internal accounts as to what they can roll and carry forward without an explanation each from year to year. There are times where two senior classes, for example, may be sharing the cost of a senior project or donation to a school. I've seen that where we've had to make exceptions. So I'll have further discussion with Ms. Jenkins and the team to kind of make sure I'm understanding where that $1 million is going and who's holding it and what the intentions are behind it. So thank you. I see no further questions or comments from the board. Thank you very much. Good job. Madam Chair and members of the board, this next item was going to be pulled, and in its official discussion, it has been pulled because we're waiting on the final financial documents to go along with this. But I wanted to go ahead and get this item before the school board because, as you know, growth continues to be a significant concern that we continue to look for creative and innovative strategies to address. Haines City and Ridge, as you know, we actually capped enrollment at Haines City this year, shifted several hundred students over to Ridge Community High School, but we've seen commensurate growth on both campuses. In order to address that, in the absence of a new campus, which, as you know, we'll be coming back to in a very short time, this is I'll just refer to it as the Southeast High School, rather than get anyone concerned about where that school location may end up. The board had committed to putting that item out to bid. Just to give you a brief update as to the high school project, that is out with the architects. The final programs were identified. I think I shared this with you before. The architect needed to know that. They needed to know what the fine arts spaces would look like or the requirements were. They needed to know what the athletic requirements were. So we've provided all of that, and so they're working on the package that we can then subsequently put out for RFP. And so there will be a bidding process for individuals to come back and say, we can build that school at these dollar amounts, at this dollar amount. Subsequent to that, we know that we continue to see growth. I mean, Dr. Allen and I were having a conversation, and I know just yesterday he looked at our third calculation, and it seemingly we've grown another 1,000 kids since the start of the school year. We're now at close to 117,000 students attending schools in Polk County. So that shows that growth is a reality for us, and we need to address some issues to make sure, especially in those communities where we're seeing rapid growth, and this really goes to Ms. Lori Cunningham's community as well. But so at Haines City, the recommendation that I'm going to bring back to you is that we lease the concretables similar to what we have at Chain of Lakes, similar to what we have at Citrus Ridge. These are zero I don't want to say zero lot line, but there's zero space between the portables. They're built adjacent to each other. We'll be looking to add approximately anywhere from 30 to 48 total portables. There'll be 2 additional restroom portables. 2 portables will be set aside, one for administration, one for guidance and social workers. So essentially, you'll have almost a small campus into and of itself. Students will have access to normal lab facilities, so the science classroom, for example, science instruction may still happen in the portable, but labs and activities that require a traditional science space would then happen in a classroom environment. And so this would be a short-term, 2-year solution for that community. And then we would remove these portables from that location, and then the rezoning with the new high school would help alleviate some of the growth and congestion that we have in those communities. Subsequent to that, or in tandem to that, there will be a softball field recommendation that will also come before you. So to date, we've had so many portables on their campus, that Haines City's campus previously, that the girls' softball campus or softball field has actually been covered by portables. As a means to provide them equity and support, we bus them to a local facility where they can play. Instead of doing that, we're looking at the property that we own immediately adjacent to the high school football field. The reason, and as for construction, that project will be about $1.6 million total, 1.5 million. And the reason we've selected that location to move the softball field is there's already a field house, or let me rephrase that, a concession stand and built-in restrooms there adjacent to that facility. So it would provide us with ready access to those things. We would not have to extend and build or construct new facilities for that stadium. So those are the two items that will come before you. I just wanted to make sure that I explained them because they were on the agenda, and then we had the intention to remove them. Ms. Cunningham, we were just talking about adding the portables to Haines City, and I'll subsequently follow up with you if need be. But we were waiting on final cost and pricing, as I shared. The setbacks have already been identified by our engineers, but as you know, it's a thorough process that we follow. But these would be leased just for the 2-year period of time in which we needed them. There would be poured concrete or asphalt out in that area for students, so we don't have to worry about mud and things like that in inclement weather. And then some of those will have covered walkways and passages as well. So plenty of space, plenty of opportunity. This would, as a result, if the board approves this and we're able to increase their enrollment, and I'm hopeful that the board will approve the project for the next 2 years, then what we would do is begin communicating that to families so that they know that they can re-enroll at Haines City if they so choose. But this would also impact their overall staffing. And I know Dr. Allen, Ms. Cunningham, and several of you I've talked to about staffing recently. So this would be a consideration where, under their normal enrollment, they may, and you're going to see some of this in a few minutes, they may be subject to losing a dean or losing an assistant principal. In this case, we would not. We would refrain. We would keep that administrator there, the guidance counselor there, to support these students for the duration of their time on that campus until, again, rezoning in the new high school were to open and avail itself to these students. So just wanted to provide that. I see Dr. Allen? Or is that left over? Ms. Cunningham?
Yes, sir, thank you. Just to add to the discussion on the Haines City High School softball fields, that is something that the community has asked for even prior to your coming on board. At least 3 years that I know of, that we've had discussions, because they're currently playing at one of the fields. I don't know what you've covered. I apologize for being late. It's been quite the morning.
Yes, ma'am.
And so they've been practicing at the Point Siena Recreation Complex. And the community would really appreciate, obviously, having that back on campus, because currently that site is used for the portables, as you probably know. So I'm in great support that we would try to get them back on their campus to be able to have the kids practice right on their own field, on their own school property. So I appreciate whatever we can do to move that forward. I'll look forward to seeing. Now, are you going to be bringing forth plans or something?
Yes, ma'am. You'll see that at the
Yep.
next workshop. Staff had asked for some additional time.
Sure, okay.
Because they were getting some different numbers, and they want to make sure that what they bring you is the most accurate possible final number. Worst case scenario, right, is what you always want to see, and then you want to see cost savings as a result. So that will come before the board at the next
The
meeting.
next one. Okay, sir, thank you very much.
Seeing no further questions, at this time, I'll bring forward Ms. Pasco, who's here to discuss with you Google Drive transition to, or migration to Office 365.
Thank you,
Ms.
Superintendent.
Pasco, be aware, I apologize. I just want to make sure I preface this. If we get to 10:17, I will pause you.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Madam Chair, School Board, Superintendent Hyde, and community members. As Mr. Hyde said, I'm Ann Pasco, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Information Systems and Technology for Polk County. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about how we are moving forward with our one-to-one initiative and supporting students and staff with integrating digital technology into the classroom and our business. Polk County is continuing to streamline the technology footprint of the district and schools to ensure appropriate alignment of learning and operational platforms for implementation support and cybersecurity requirements. This process is generally described in the IT world as IT governance. As we continue to ensure that students are college and career ready, an increasing emphasis is placed on data and digital access in the classroom. Simultaneously, we have an increased need for cybersecurity protections and risk management in the digital environment as they've increased globally. You heard our auditor mention the IT risk assessment. This is the type of thing I'm referring to. Too many options create confusion for users. They create inconsistency in our business and our classroom processes, and they don't allow us to concentrate support efforts in a way that can ensure that digital learning is not interrupted. We also want to make sure at the same time, however, that we provide tools that allow for differentiated learning in the classroom for all students to be able to learn to the best of their ability. So this IT governance idea allows us to align our IST decisions with our learning decisions by 4 important bullets. We ensure that appropriate benefits are realized from the utilization of IST resources. So fiscally appropriate decisions, human resource appropriate decisions, all of that we want to align. We also want to minimize our risk, just like we talked about with cybersecurity. We want to optimize all of our resources to ensure we have equitable access across the district while remaining fiscally responsible. And of course, we want to align our resources to the strategic plan goals. So we want to all be in one happy family, all aligned, moving forward together. How do we do that? So we have first chosen to support our users and our services within our framework to provide optimal digital learning environments in the classroom. Our first area of streamlining these resources will be to support only Microsoft productivity tools district-wide and sunset Google Drive productivity tools. So what does that actually mean, and why would we pick Microsoft? Currently, we do have a Microsoft implementation and licensing contract that was executed in 2019. So we've had Microsoft for many years. You can see the descriptions here. It is a robust environment that incorporates our email services, including encryption. It creates our user accounts and makes sure everything is flowing appropriately. We have Defender, which is security also across all of our platforms. It ensures we have built-in intelligence. If somebody makes an accidental click on something, then we have software that's watching that and making sure we're protecting our end users. We respond to threats. Anything that comes in as we detect that we might have, it's typically called a DDoS threat, anything that's attacking our network. A young lady just called the other day to interview me for a classroom project, and she said, "How do you keep us safe?" And I asked her if she understood castles and moats, and that's kind of what we're talking about. We create a moat around our whole network so that we can protect ourselves. Then we have Office 365, so those are our productivity tools. Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, I'm sure you're very familiar since you're looking at that right now on the slide, how those things work. OneDrive is individual cloud storage. So for instance, I created this in OneDrive and I shared it out with individuals who could give me feedback before we presented today. SharePoint is collaborative cloud storage. So that's where, just like we talked about different manuals, we might keep those internally in one spot and then put them out there on our hub replacement for people to find in a searchable area. And student and staff accessibility tools. So this is key. One of the things that has happened with our one-to-one implementation is we have been able to take accessibility tools that were no longer viable to all students and put them in the hands of students. And Microsoft is very good at that. They provide learning opportunities in the classroom where students can have closed caption. They can have things for hearing impaired. You wouldn't know, but I'm deaf in my left ear. So things like that that will help us be able to access our learning just like everyone else, and that's a key component of the Microsoft platform. Another key component that we receive with Microsoft is significant support. We have on-demand and as-needed support hours. We have an online support portal, problem resolution hours, on-site visits, and professional learning credits. In fact, as the IST department, although I'm here representing the department, the entire department's been involved in this. The networking, the digital learning, our business and instructional technology operations and help desk, we've all been going through with Microsoft looking at governance policies, creating these documents, and we've been doing that with their support. Now for Google Drive. That was implemented prior to the availability of some of these Microsoft online tools. So there was a reason at that time to have both. And we utilized the free Google for Education suite. Initially, we utilized it for student email, online productivity tools and cloud storage, and internal collaborative sites. All of these are available with Microsoft. We do not have any dedicated Google support. So we have decided to standardize on the Microsoft platform. And how will we do that, and how will we support students and staff? Because that's the most important thing. You can have a great plan, but if you're not supporting students and staff, that's going to be a problem. So the way we're going to do that is currently we're discussing this with you. We have talked with principals to make sure they are aware as well. And tomorrow I will personally be providing emails out to all staff in the district to let them know the plan so that they will get that and be able to review it. We'll explain the rationale as well as assist in how to find their Google Drive documents that they've created over the past 3 years. During February, we essentially will do discovery open house sessions that we will be emailing out tomorrow, where we will ask users if they have any concerns to come talk to us. Let us know what those are so we can make sure we have a personalized plan to ensure that everything is supported. I've already had a few principals reach out, and we will be providing one-to-one case-by-case support for that. During March, we will provide virtual, face-to-face, and self-paced tutorials. So we want to make sure staff have all types of options to be able to receive that support on how to utilize the Microsoft tools. Note that for many staff, this is not new. They have had this before, but we want to make sure anyone who was more comfortable in Google now has every opportunity to be comfortable in Microsoft. During April and May, we'll continue to provide that. And then in May, we actually will move the documents over for the staff. So they won't lose anything. We will move it over. We're working with a company that we will have a process for that, both their shared tools and their personal tools. And with that, what questions might you have for me? I'm good. How are you?
Great. I think we've got 10 minutes left, so might be able to get a question or two in here. Besides Google Drive, obviously there's a suite of tools.
Yes, sir.
Do you see us moving to eliminate more of those as far as within the Google suite of applications, in a sense, I guess? And then other ones, like, for example, now we'll have Teams. I don't know if you're going to, simulate that out. So then at that point, do we, pull back on Zoom as an option?
I'll give you the full picture. So yes, we will be sunsetting all of the Google tools that we have. Typically, Google Sites was the only one used, and we'll be migrating that to SharePoint Sites, and we're working with staff to do that. We did a full dive, and most of the Google tools were not being utilized to their extent. Many people had moved over to Microsoft. Teams is part of Microsoft, so that will be continuing. We did pull back this year with student access in Teams as we move to Schoology. One of the key pieces with governance and IT is to make sure that you have many tools that fit together. We call that interoperability. And so we needed to pull back for Schoology, and now we're working with Microsoft to re-embed Teams for next year to create robust offerings. So yes, we will be continuing to maximize everything that Microsoft has. In fact, I sat on a call last week, have a meeting with Mr. McNaughton next week about some of the new learning tools they're bringing about as well.
Mm-hmm. And I would assume, our LMS integrates very well, but do you see any other barriers with other software applications that we are currently utilizing that do not integrate well with our Microsoft move?
No, by standardizing on one platform for Microsoft, we're able to have the conversations we need to leverage those partnerships and tell different companies, this is what we need to do what's best for our students. So we do a lot of work in the back end. For instance, that's why we're going to have Teams, because we asked them to integrate it into Schoology. So they're going to do that so students can do both. So that's part of streamlining the support for the IT department. So we have time to work with those vendors to make sure they're providing what we need for our students. Does that kind of get to the question you're asking about?
So Teams currently is not, they don't have an API, meaning our Schoology LMS does not have a current API with Teams. They're going to have to develop that.
Yeah, well, they're already in progress.
Yeah.
Yes, so, and transparently, with our size, we have a lot of students, so it's nice that we have that partnership with Microsoft, because a lot of times they'll bring it to us, ask us for feedback, what do you think, and we can be on the ground, talking with them about what we need for our students. And our staff, because our staff use these tools, and as well as business. I think that's another thing for us to talk about. We just talked about business processes and really needing that transparent information. So we've actually in the IT department split, and we have business technology support and instructional technology support to make sure we're doing the same tools for everyone and making sure we're meeting all of those needs. You're welcome.
Thank you. My question was similar, but I had already pressed the button before he finished asking. So I've heard a lot of complaints from community partners about the use of Teams because they're not able to get on the calls as easily. They're not able to share. How are we managing that? Because we do have a lot of committees that, you know, we do a really good job, I think, trying to involve our community members. So I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in the transition.
Yep, so last year, the decision was made to sunset Zoom prior to me starting with Polk County, so I can't really advise why that decision was made. We have had some challenges with Teams. I actually have a meeting today at noon about that very topic, and our goal is to have that accomplished this week. One challenge we have had this year is there are so many tools that when we're making decisions, we can't make the right decision because we don't know what tools were maybe out there for what purpose. So that's this year of trying to build that so that we can ensure the decisions we're making do not cause negative impact for situations like that. But that one should be resolved this week.
Thank you. I appreciate that you already knew about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
So every time I sit down at the dinner table, I'm with teachers, okay? My whole family's teachers.
Yes, sir.
And so one of my just concerns is, and I know they're going to be asking me questions about this, how difficult is this transition going to be for our staff? I know you talked about, providing office hours and that kind of stuff. Is there going to be any additional requirements for our staff, teachers, or anything to understand this new technology? I mean, I'm just curious to know what the transition's actually going to look like.
So they'll have many tools available to them if they can come to the online support hours in February, and that will be widely disseminated. We have one per day for the entire rest of the month in February and up until spring break. And then they'll have support. They can do a self-paced tutorial. They can meet with us one-on-one. They can come to a face-to-face meeting. So there will be a myriad of opportunities. As far as how difficult it can be, that's the piece with technology that can be a challenge because we're all individual. I will be transparent. I did not set up this technology today, so Mr. Spruce met me at 8:30 to make sure I knew how to use my technology to be here. So there's always a nervousness anytime you change technology and you're using it to ensure that you provide learning. And teachers get nervous with that, and we understand that. So that's why we're providing this entire semester to do that. Those Google Drives won't go away until the end of May when they leave, to make sure that they have the full semester to prepare to then start in next year. What I will tell you is if you're at the dinner table and they're nervous, please tell them we don't judge. They can come every day for support if they want. We're not going to limit how much support that they need to do that. Yep.
Ms. Pasco, please, again, historically, we had Office before we had Google, correct?
Yes, sir. We did.
So the vast majority of the tools that are being utilized are already well understood. Conceptually, this is not something completely new and different. This is just a transition between two programs and platforms because one provides us a much more robust support mechanism and growth opportunity for our district. There are some utilities that are new in Microsoft Office Suite, but if you think about it from that perspective, Office 360 has been free for educators for probably the last 20 years, and by and large was the platform of choice for many school districts for a long time. I'm not sure when we made the choice to go to Google, but that's become a problem is every one of us is still operating on Microsoft Office Outlook as you are, and then, but yet we still have Google utilities. And so it becomes a conflict for us going back and forth. So I don't necessarily see this going to have a huge impact on our staff, but I think that the plan that Ms. Pasco and her team have put together, that over the next few months and over the next year will be more than adequate to support the staff's transition. Because the biggest issue that you're going to deal with, quite honestly, is not adapting to a new platform or a new utility. The biggest issue is making sure they secure whatever content they had previously developed and transition that over. That's the part that takes the most amount of time. Having gone through this before, actually, I was in a district that went the reverse direction. But we were willing to pay for some Google support and utilities, and so that at that point it made sense for the school district to do it. So,
And can I ask one more thing? And I think I want to make sure I heard this correctly. So whenever you're actually contracting with a company to bring those documents from their Google Suite into this new Microsoft?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So nothing should be lost. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Nothing will be
well,
lost.
Okay.
No.
I'd be happy to say should. I'm not going to guarantee because, again, why don't we have certain handbooks that are readily available on our websites because documents exist all over the place in the hub and have to be unified. So I will not be the one that sits here and says 100% accuracy will or all documents will be transferred. I can't say that with all sincerity. So
Thank you.
You're welcome.
at this time, thank you, Ms. Pasco. Oh, Dr. Allen was next, but Dr. Allen, prior to you doing that, it's now 10:17. So what I'd like to ask is for everybody in the room to please join us in a moment of silence. Today is the anniversary date of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and the tragic events that took place there. The governor asked for all schools to place flags at half-mast and to participate in a moment of silence if appropriate. Our middle schools and high schools will be doing that. Elementary schools will not, simply because we didn't have enough time to communicate that to parents. So we are sending a message home for families this evening about why we had a pause today, and encouraging them to have discussions with their children at home tonight. So please join me for a moment of silence, if you would. Thank you. Dr. Allen.
I think I'll just hold my thought and question, just address it to you via email. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to bring up Ms. McKenzie and Stacy Davis. Ms. McKenzie is the Senior Director for K-12 Literacy, and Stacy Davis is the Senior Coordinator for Library and Media Services. I'm sure they'll do a better job of explaining even further, but if the board will recall, one of the requirements that we initiated as a school district was we ceased the ongoing procurement of library materials, meaning our schools were accustomed to ordering books throughout the year. We no longer allow that. We have asked every school to submit all of their procurement requests within a specified window of time each year. So elementary schools have a window, middle schools have a window, high schools have a window. The reasoning behind that is to allow this team and several others who operate in the background the opportunity to review all of those materials prior to them being submitted to the board for recommendation for procurement. The same rules apply as I shared with you before. Nothing that is not currently in our media centers or would be deemed appropriate, nothing that conflicts are included. Nothing that's in states that would be in conflict with state statute are on these lists. But again, what you have is a comprehensive list of all school requests for procurements. If the board were to approve all these, then the community has 30 days in which to file an appeal. Remember, the board's approval of a purchase list does not mean that we are purchasing the books tomorrow. It simply means we are setting the stage for that procurement. We wait the 30 days. If there are no appeals at that time, then those procurements will take place. Even subsequent to that, if there's a book at a later date that someone finds objectionable, then they have a right under statute and then with board policy and our school code to object to a book and have it reviewed further if need be. So I'm just providing you a brief summary before I turn it over to these two amazing ladies who have done an incredible job and really are the real reason why we got invited to Tallahassee to share our policies and procedures about our books and how we've managed this process throughout, because really they're the workhorses behind the scenes that make the magic happen. So thank you, ladies, for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde, ladies and gentlemen of the board. I apologize for the large number of orders that you have in front of you. But again, as the superintendent already mentioned, these are all the orders that will be, all the library and classroom book orders for this school year. Typically, we would have different ordering seasons, but the orders before you come from library media material funding, that's state funding. ESSER funding, so that's our federal grant funding, which we are fortunate to have this year. So next year, we will have spent that money. Next year, we will not have those included. Title I monies and any other local school funds used to purchase library or classroom materials. We held off doing any ordering this year, as other districts did as well, while we waited for the state to release the mandatory training, which was in January 1 when that was released. So no new library books have been purchased this school year, which means that we also have students who are anxiously awaiting for the next book in a series or the latest book about their favorite team to be released. I want you to understand also that we have trained certified staff, which we do have a portion of those who hold master's degrees in library information studies, who created the orders following the process, which I'd like to take just a minute to explain to you. So 100% of our certified media specialists attended the state mandated training that was released on January 1. We held this in our district on January 11th, and they have completed the required follow-up paperwork that the superintendent will have to certify at a later date. They attended previous trainings on collection analysis, collection development action plans, and creating orders using professional peer review sources and utilizing our district rating system for purchases. By September 1st, each certified media specialist created a collection development action plan that included a collection analysis, school demographics, identified weeding or discontinuance candidates based on age and circulation, and recommendations for areas of collection growth. I might add that this is an annual task that all of our schools complete. As required by statute, they work to create orders representative of each school's unique population, teacher-student request, and support for academic standards. All of the titles were selected using our district rating system for elementary, middle, and high, with exceptions made for best titles because those have already been approved by the state. They also used professional periodical review sources such as Kirkus, Booklist, School Library Journal, and Publishers Weekly. Crowdsource reviews such as Common Sense, Amazon Goodreads are not considered professional periodical review sources, so our certified staff go to the professional periodical review sources first. After the media specialist spent, I might add, hours and hours of evening and weekend time working on these orders, all of these orders were reviewed by their school stakeholder committee as required by statute. You might know that better as our school media committee, so when we have book challenges or book reviews, that's that same committee that serves in that capacity. So the stakeholder committee is made up of teachers, parents, community members, administrators, and students at the middle school and high school levels. As required by statute, principals also reviewed all these purchases and signed off on the order verification form. We do have 30 schools that are staffed with media paraprofessionals or non-certified staff. So for those schools, the Library Media Services team created the Collection Development Action Plan, and we share that back with the media staff member and the principal, so they would know what were the needs of their collection, what did they need to focus on for weeding books that were outdated. The orders were created again by our library media specialist team at the district level, taking into consideration the wish list that each school had the opportunity to submit and the collection analysis needs. The orders were then sent back to the school for the same process of the stakeholder committee to review those and for the principal to sign off on. I would like to thank the media specialists and media paraprofessionals across our district for their diligence and dedication, putting students first and ensuring that these orders represent their diverse student populations and the needs of our schools. Questions?
I just want to say thank you for presenting today and making that available, that information available to the public. And I appreciate the work you've done to make him look good in Tallahassee. That always helps. I'm interested in the media committees. So all of our schools have media committees for reviewing new orders and any concerns that a parent may have in that school.
Yes, that's correct. And those are in place by August. And that's not something new. That's something the district has had for a number of years.
Thank you.
There are no further questions or comments. Thank you, ladies. This time, we have the instructional calendar for students, teachers, and paraeducators. Mr. Warren. Board members, as he makes his way up, because this will be a very short presentation. If you recall, the board approved the tentative calendars for the next 2 school years. We will be bringing you an additional calendar in the near future. The only things that were not completed on this calendar was the first week of school for teachers, basically outlining what their week would look like upon that first week. That's a non-student attendance week. It typically is a combination of both personal plan or independent planning time for them to structure their classrooms and do some lesson planning, as well as professional development and or school culture climate conversations with the overarching faculty and or by the department. So there was a lot of conversation about how to best structure that time in collaboration with PEA and our school-based administrators, and so we are bringing that back to you. All calendars were published this weekend in a draft form. They'll be finalized after today. There's no vote required. The board has already approved and authorized these calendars. We simply wanted to make sure that we had a conversation with you and with our community so that they knew what these teachers would be doing for the first week upon returning to school. So, Mr. Warren.
Correct. I'll segue from there. We were in discussions as recently as yesterday relative to the memorandum of understanding that we need in place for the 6 days that's been discussed with you regarding, I call them the 6 days return to school calendar. And one of the benefits I believe that occurred through the calendar process this year was kind of embedding a discussion of how return to work would look in repetitive years. And it was a good collaborative discussion relative to the half days of PD and teacher work days that occurred. Furthermore, yesterday at the table with the union, we provided opportunity for schools to have site-based latitude, whether they provide that PD in the morning or the afternoon to assist with those schools and their needs individually. Because we also were collaborating with our district folks for how to provide that PD across a district platform as well. So the MOU is in place, the calendars are on the website, and should you have any questions, we're here to assist. We had community members represented, folks from Polk State College. We had your individual representatives, some of you board members had folks joining us as well as yourselves personally. So we appreciate that feedback. We met twice. I would say both times we had, I would say, at least 35 folks in attendance, and it was a great collaboration. Any questions?
Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you. Just wanted to commend the Calendar Review Committee. I mean, they're just a great bunch of folks, and I know I've had a young lady on there for, holy cow, close to 18 years, and she continues to serve our community well, Ms. June Ullman. In addition to that, I'm noticing, is it true that as we go forward, both in August of '23 and August of '24, there are those 6 days?
That's correct.
So, okay, and it makes more sense, obviously, in August of '24, because students start on a Monday. But we talked about that last time. I actually asked, having them come on a Friday. But you had indicated it was a transportation thing. So with us starting on a Monday, is Rob going to be upset with us?
So is it the second year that it fell on the
Yes.
Monday?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So
20
Mr. Davis wanted this year
This year.
to problem solve, but he is insistent that he would like that extra day.
Right. That's fine.
He did not win out in the second calendar committee
Did not,
discussion.
okay. Okay. All right, just trying to make sure it will continue being the 6 days, and are you looking forward to this continuing after that?
That was the mindset, I believe, of the committee moving forward, is that this seemed to be a return to work schedule that seemed to make sense.
Okay.
It met the needs of both parties, and we look forward to presenting that for the 25-26, I believe, calendar. We're now 2 years out. We have 23-24 and 24-25 that are in the bank.
Because taking it to 6 days, we were able to pull a full release professional development day out of September and reassigned it. I believe it was September.
Yes.
We reassigned it to the start of the school year, so there's less disruptions once the school year begins.
And I think you mentioned that at the last meeting.
Yeah, we have a more consistent calendar moving forward.
Okay, well, that's great. Okay, sir, thank you very much, and thank you to all the folks that serve so diligently on that committee year after year. We really appreciate your time and talent, so thank you, and to staff.
Mr. Nolte.
Yes, thank you for all your hard work, but as I go around and talk to my different teacher friends and everything, I just keep hearing the same thing. Why do we go back on Friday? I think I'm a little bit better educated now in it, but I do hear that's the biggest thing I hear from the teachers, custodians, lunch, everybody said, please, when you get on the board, get them to open up on a Monday. So anyway, thank you again for all your hard work, though.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That's it, Mr. Warren. Thank you very much. At this time, Madam Chair, we've been going for about an hour and a half. I believe it's time for a restroom break. If we could take a 10-minute short recess. It is 10:31. We will come back. We'll do more than a 10-minute recess. We'll come back at 10:45.
Good morning again, and we are officially back, and I'll hand it back over to Superintendent Hyde.
Madam Chair, members of the board, members of the community and staff, thank you again for allowing us that short break. At this time, I'd like to bring up, pardon me, I had the wrong highlighted.
Andy?
I have Ms. Candy Amato, Senior Director from our Office of Charter Schools, here to discuss preliminarily some conversation about Language for Literacy Academy and their renewal. All yours, Ms. Amato.
Is the sixth and final charter renewal for this school year. So we have Language and Literacy Academy of Learning up for their very first contract renewal. This slide is very familiar. It was the same slide that I provided during the December work session. It talks about what we can do and how we can do for renewal and the requirements associated with the renewal process. And I added this piece for cause for non-renewal or termination of charter. It is referenced as when we do not, if a non-renewal is recommended or suggested, these are the terms that have to be met in order to recommend that. This is the review process. The charter review team looks for the following things. Is the program successful? Is it a viable organization? And is the school faithful to the term of its charter? And when the review team is doing the process, those are the three main focuses that we look into when we're reviewing the documentation provided by the school. Sorry, I am freezing. So we have here Language and Literacy Academy for Learning. The background of the school is they opened in 2018. They are an ESC center school located in Winter Haven. The district staff, the charter review team, conducted a site visit back in October, and the school is requesting a 15-year contract to begin July 1st and run through June 30th of 2038. So this is a breakdown of the student performance. Now please know, because this is their first 5-year renewal, they're limited in the data that they have available. Language and Literacy receives a school improvement rating because they are an ESC center school. So as you can see, their very first year, they received a grade or school improvement rating. They were listed as unsatisfactory. Obviously, in 1920, there was no grades issued. 2021, they opted for no grade again. And the 21-22 school year, they did increase to maintaining. This is their current demographics. They are approved to serve 290 students. And they do serve students from pre-K through 12. So
this is how the charter review team voted. And I did provide you with the breakdown of the tally of the votes, because as you can see, the charter review team was kind of all over the map with some concerns, and it is truly reflected in their vote. So these are some of the findings, and I don't want to read all of them to you word for word, but some of them are extremely important and very valuable to the conversation. So some great things that we did see is they do provide the services and accommodations are provided directly into the classroom. And they provide transportation, which is huge for the population of students that they serve. They provide transportation from Lakeland to Bartow, Winter Haven, Haines City, Davenport, Auburndale, Lake Wales. If you know where they're located, they are catty corner from Denison Middle School. So they kind of are in the heart of Winter Haven. So just knowing that they're reaching all of those other outskirt populations speaks volumes to the services that they do provide to their students. The physical and cultural environment of the school was friendly, safe, and it was inviting. They do submit their monthly financials and their audits as outlined in their current contract. And they were extremely excited that they renovated the auditorium, they updated the front office, they installed a beautiful ADA playground equipment, and they've added 3 modular classrooms so they can accommodate the additional students that they serve. Some other concerns, areas of concerns of findings that we did find. During the 21-22 school year, there were some test security concerns to the point where the Assessment, Accountability, and Evaluation Department did require the school create a thorough assessment plan to ensure that security breaches would not occur again in the future. Just please note the person who was handling testing at the time is no longer with the school, and we have not had those concerns since then. They do only have, at the time at the visit, they only had 1 ESE facilitator. The charter review team felt for a school that serves 290 ESE students, 1 ESE facilitator was not significant to provide adequate support, so it was a recommendation to add a second ESE facilitator. When I reviewed Language and Literacy's January board minutes, it did appear that they have added a second LEA, which is huge. That's very important. It was also recommended that their student-to-teacher ratio should be lower. It is an ESE center school, so we felt that based on having a lower significant population in the classroom, the students would have better service in regards to the best standards. This one was a huge concern is, although it is an ESE center school, they do have students taking regular Algebra 1, 1A, 1B, or Algebra 1 in general. And during the walkthrough in October, it appeared that the students were only on Chapter 1. Based on our learning maps, the students should have been on Chapter 3. There were 3 students who, although are parentally placed there, their only service of need is speech. So the question to the review team was, is that the best placement for those students? We're going to circle back to this top one in regards to a high need for a certified school counselor. That has since been rectified, but there are additional conversations that need to be added. At the time of the visit, though, there was not a certified counselor, which is a concern in regards to providing accuracy for schedule. They do serve high school students, so making sure they're satisfying those graduation requirements. The master schedule has significant layering of courses and grade levels. It is the charter review team's recommendation to eliminate the stacking of different content areas, courses, and stacking of grade levels, meaning elementary and secondary in the same class period. So what I mean by that is, so for example, we have a staff member here who during 5th period teaches 2 students access geometry, 3 students grade 4 math, 2 students grade 5 math, 4 students MJ US history, 3 students MJ civics, 2 students MJ world history, and 1 student Algebra 1A, and all of those are access courses. That is all in 1 class period. And that's just one example of what we discovered in their master schedule that was of its huge concern for the charter review team. Another major concern is in a recent grad check, they do have 6 seniors scheduled this year. As we started uncovering their academic record, we noticed huge discrepancies in regards to the students' eligibility to graduate.
We did call in a meeting. The school responded quickly. They did come within a 24-hour notice. We did have an extensive 2-hour-plus meeting to work through all of these concerns. And again, I circle back to having a certified guidance counselor on staff could have maybe helped preempt some of those concerns. After the conclusion of that meeting, the next day, the principal did notify me they hired a guidance counselor. So I think they understood the magnitude of that position. Teacher certification is an ongoing concern at the school, with not all certified in ESE, content area, reading endorsement, and ESOL endorsement. There's a low percentage of highly qualified teachers that are fully certified according to FLDOE requirements. Again, based on their January board minutes, 13 teachers on their staff are considered long-term subs. And with that, if you have 13 vacancies, there are currently no employment opportunities posted on their website. When you click on employment opportunities, when you click on it, it does take you to another link. When you click on the link for employment, it tells you that the link is no longer active. In October, when we had our face-to-face site meeting, the school had plans to purchase the current facility that they were in. As of mid-January, with a phone conversation with the CPA and the executive director principal, they notified us that they intended to no longer try to purchase the building at that time, but they were going to extend the current lease. They did provide a copy of the lease. The lease does have an expiration date of October 31st of 2023. Upon further research, based on Grace Lutheran Church's website, they have indicated that the church has since bought the building from the owner, but Language and Literacy does have the option to stay through the 23-24 school year. I have no other updates in regards to their future plans and or what that's going to look like for the students and the staff. Financial concerns. In April of 2020, that was right when the world shut down, Polk County Public Schools, in partnership with the finance department, did have to send a formal notification to Language and Literacy indicating that they had a negative fund balance to the tune of negative $95,555. In May of 2020, the school notified the district that they had received their very first PPP loan. Therefore, they were no longer in the negative, so Polk County Public Schools took no further action, as we aren't obligated to at that point. The school has an ending unassigned fund balance of 2.76%. Both of their PPP loans have been forgiven. Language and Literacy does receive supplemental revenue from Charter School Capital. Without access to these funds, it is the district's opinion that the school's expenditures, the school's expenditures do exceed their current revenue. Without access to those funds, it is potential that their balance would continue to remain negative. However, for the remainder of the 22-23 school year, Polk County Public Schools is scheduled to mail their January, March, April, and May FEFPs payment directly to Charter School Capital if warranted. So from our understanding, the way it was explained, Charter School Capital sends those assignments ahead of time. Therefore, if Language and Literacy does need the extra revenue, they reach out directly to Charter School Capital, they get the money, and then it's in turn paid back as needed. If Language and Literacy does not need to access any funds from Charter School Capital, if we do by chance mail the FEF payment directly to Charter School Capital does turn around and send it right back to Language and Literacy. Language and Literacy did provide notification from their CPA that they do plan to move away from relying on Charter School Capital. However, they're not looking to forecast that until the 24-25 school year. Their current monthly revenue has decreased by approximately $75,000 based on their updated October 2022 FTE reporting. If expenditures remain consistent with prior month, the fund balance will be negative. Language and Literacy provided a 15-year revenue projected budget as required because they asked for a 15-year contract, which included capital outlay, Medicaid reimbursement, and donations. All of these items are subject to change and are not guaranteed revenue. For example, Medicaid reimbursement typically runs 2 quarters behind, and capital outlay funds are allocated to eligible charter schools by Section 1013, establishes eligible criteria and allocations procedures and distribution of capital outlay funds to the charter schools. And that gets verified every year. And these are the actual capital outlay requirements. That's not something we typically discuss, so I did want to make sure I provided what those requirements are for you. So in their application, this is for their 15-year, the length of their contract that they're requesting. These would be the enrollment projections that they would like to add to serving students of ESE needs. Now, my next slide is just to let you know is how the charter review team voted. Please know, we had extensive conversation. We had several meetings. Mr. Bridges did provide legal counsel in regards to what does it mean to non-renew. We did have extensive conversation on what it would look like if we offered them a 1 year. There was extensive conversation on what is the minimum we are required to give them. But at the end of the day, 7 voted to approve. However, there was a caveat that they wanted to ensure that there were some conditions and provisions in a renewal process that would come through contract negotiations. That was the only way the 7 felt comfortable providing any type of a renewal with the conditions being attached. 1 member did vote to deny. And then the 7 that voted to approve with conditions were split between the 2 and the 3 years. Next steps will be, this will come back to you at the February 28th board meeting for the superintendent's recommendation and a vote. And then if approved, the general counsel, myself, and the school would move into contract negotiations. If you voted to non-renew, general counsel and myself would then be drafting a letter to meet statute language to notify the school of the board's vote to non-renew. Any questions?
Thank you. I have a few. When I get turned on. All right, thank you very much. Couple of things. First of all, when you indicated the information regarding the curriculum and having all those different classes in one class, that needs to be very strictly monitored because I don't know what type of learning is happening in that environment. Being married to a teacher, if he had to teach 7 classes within one class, that would be a wee bit difficult, to say the least. So I'm really uncomfortable with the curriculum piece that I've heard this morning. And I'm going on record saying that because I think they need to do something about it. Secondly, you indicated that there were 13 vacancies, substitute teachers. That's a vacancy to me, but okay, it's a substitute teacher, but with no plans to fill that. So a couple questions. Number one is 13 teachers or substitute teachers out of how many total for the school?
So they have, when I pull their master schedule, they have 30 staff members, but that includes all of their therapists because students, when they have therapy,
Yes, ma'am.
the students get scheduled into therapy. So the therapists do appear on the master schedule. I would have to pull how many of instructional staff.
That's what I'm asking. But I'm going to assume that substitute teachers are more than half of the current academic staff that are teaching core academic classes. I might be wrong, but that would be a guess. And that is,
Yes, if there's 30
Right.
people on their master schedule,
Right.
including therapists, and
Yes.
13 are considered long-term subs.
right. We have an issue there. Now, I'm not trying to say anything negative against a long-term sub. We've all had them, and some are really excellent because they've been in that job for a number of years. So I'm not saying anything. It's a little bit alarming that there wouldn't at least be the opportunity to hire a permanent teacher for those children. And I don't know why, but that's a question I would like you to ask. What is their plans to move forward? Are they waiting for those long-term subs to get their certificate? I mean, there's a myriad of questions, okay. Because those children deserve better. That completes my questions for this morning. I'm just sad to hear about that, and I'm not very favorable personally at this point in time to renew a contract based on what I'm hearing, and of course, the Charter Review Committee's comments as well. So I'll be sure to go through that. When are we voting on this? How much?
It'll come back to the board February 28th for the board vote.
In 2 weeks. Okay, thank you very much. That
Ms. Wyatt?
Thank you, Mr. Hyde, and thank you, Ms. Amato. I echo some of Ms. Cunningham's concerns. Can you talk a little bit about the fund balance? Because I know if we as a school district are under a 3% fund balance, we're sent into state takeover, or on that path at least. So statutorily, what are the requirements if their fund balance dips below 3%?
I'm going to refer to the finance expert, Ms. Jenkins, who sat in on numerous meetings with us, so she's very familiar.
There are recommendations for charter schools, but they're not held to the same 3% compliance that we are. However, it is recommended that they maintain a 3% fund balance. Looking forward, that recommendation is because some charter schools are owned and operated by corporations, whereas they have a multitude that they can fund. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, I think my biggest concern, aside 7 or 8 preps in one class period just sounds, I'm pretty sure I saw Stephanie's entire head roll in the back. That I just can't even imagine teaching that many classes at once. But my biggest concern, I think, is the finances and that it's just not sustainable moving forward, especially if adding in the PPP with the forgiveness only brought them up to not even 3%. And they're not showing a positive revenue in the future, a positive trend there, that I do have a lot of concerns, but I look forward to seeing what my other board members have to say.
Mr. Nolte?
I concur what my colleague said, because I know it's difficult to teach 1 or 2 preps, but to have more than 1 or 2 preps, that would be unbelievable. Did I hear you say that there were 6 openings, but they're not advertised?
7.
Or 7?
So they have 13 long-term subs.
Right.
And when I looked on their employment opportunities on their website, those positions are not posted as if they are actively searching for a full-time teacher.
Because I would think that if they're not posted on their website, that they're really not very actively looking for people. Because there's so many teachers out there that I think would love to have that opportunity. But I do appreciate your hard work and your colleagues' hard work, but that's a little big question mark in my mind. But thank you.
Dr. Allen?
Yeah, definitely some good discussion here, and appreciate the analysis and reflecting on that, the situation that you're observing in the classroom, and then you note the low percentage of fully certified teachers. What was the credential in that particular situation? I know we addressed the layered academic, rigor in a sense, I guess, or different class grade levels. What was the analysis of the certification level in a sense?
So in regards to the certification of the teachers that they currently have,
In that particular situation, yeah.
where I don't recall the teachers, I excluded names, so I'd have to go back and look on my original notes on regards to the teacher that was not following the curriculum map, so to speak, in chapter 1, chapter 3. Is that what you're asking for specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you're saying there's a low percentage of fully certified teachers.
Yes.
And then you unpacked that one situational analysis, I was curious if that particular instructor was actually even certified, is what I was asking.
Okay, I would have to go back and check
Yeah.
the teacher's name because I didn't include that in my note, or in my write-up. But I do know they do have 5 teachers currently on their staff that are listed temporary certificate out of field.
I see.
And then they have the 13 that are long-term subs.
Okay. And then, you mentioned that they did turn around and quickly hire a guidance counselor. Did we get an update on the budget in regards to that expenditure thereafter?
So the the conversation where we met with the school in regards to the graduates, that just happened last week. So no, we have not received an updated budget from the CPA. We did have multiple conversations when we were diving into their budget that they provided, both their 15-year and their current budget. And we did have a phone conference with the CPA and did provide, and we did ask for additional information. However, even the additional information we asked for wasn't necessarily what we needed. So it was very hard to dive in to determine that. But we do not have a new expenditure with the new guidance counselor.
Sure. Okay. Maybe one more. Oh, yeah, I was thinking on the building situation, right? So you're looking at, in a sense, a guaranteed 1-year extension on their lease, but with new ownership. So if we're looking at, say, a 3 or a 4-year extension, is there any type of plan or anything like that if that was not available to them after this next year?
So we did find out after the charter review team voted, I did find out that the building had been purchased and language and literacy was only being provided in another year. So that was information that was not available during the charter review team vote and conversation that came in after the fact. We do have schools that relocate. We had another situation with another school that did relocate in the middle of the summer. So it does happen, but considering the population of students that they serve, the ADA compliance, the beautiful playground that they just built, those are factors that would need to be concerned. They wouldn't necessarily be able to go into just any location. It would have to be something that could meet their needs.
Yeah.
So that is a question and a concern.
Yeah. And I was just wondering if there would be a potential to hear from the new owners if they would do a multi-year contract on the property rather than a year-to-year lease, but.
I can't speak for the church, but I do know at one time the church did occupy that building that they're in, and it did serve as their pre-K program. So I'm not sure if the church is looking to head back in that same direction.
But it needs to be noted as well that this information did not become available to us through the provider. We became aware of the housing issue through second and third party. So there is a lack of transparency here that we're also dealing with and seeking to address. So, and to your point, there are different certification requirements for elementary, middle, and high. In the case of 6 classrooms being taught, my concern rises not only, and you can absolutely teach a 3-4 class or a 4-5 class or a 1-2 class. Those combination classes happen all the time, especially in the world of special education. What becomes alarming is when you start infusing middle school and other courses, because the certifications do become far more explicit for those content areas. And even on a temporary certificate, I would find it hard to believe that they are well-knowledged and well-versed in that content area and are able to differentiate at a level commensurate with that type of strategy in the classroom. It's not possible.
Yeah, and that was really at the core of my question.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think to Ms. Amato's point, we just need to go back and determine how many of those positions are instructional positions. I think we'll be surprised. I don't think we'll be surprised finding a large number of them are. They're also cheaper. I mean, when you're looking at long-term subs, you don't have to have some of the same commitments that you do with traditional long-term employees, such as benefits. And so depending on the number of days they work, you can actually exclude them from actually qualifying for benefits. So, but it's just a numbers game. So I'm concerned about the finances, concerned about the instruction, concerned about their staffing, ultimately concerned about what their location would be. And I think Ms. Amato answered it the best she could. Even if the church were to tell us today, the current owner were to tell us today that, yes, they don't see an issue in the next 2-3 years, that could change overnight. If all of a sudden they choose to open up their own facility and do something different for students. And as you know, as Florida looks to expand voucher opportunities, that will become an interest of many of our parochial and private entities. So it would not surprise me if they were to change their mind at a later date. I'm not saying they would, but these are things that we have to take into consideration. And so I think Ms. Amato and her team did a fabulous job evaluating the application prior to making a recommendation or bringing a recommendation to me. Ms. Miller?
Thank you. I have a few questions, and unfortunately, I haven't been out to visit yet. I have been invited, and I plan to go. I have several questions.
Okay. I figured you would.
Only because this model, there are other model schools similar to this ESC, when you call it a center school, I don't want our center school staff to watch this. People need to understand that our center schools only teach access. So we don't have Florida standards classes in our center schools because of the type of students. We have the most significantly challenged students in center schools. And I'm not sure if that's the makeup of this school to understand that, but I'm sure I'll plan to visit. My question, many of them are on the finance end of it. And so charter school capital, when you say that, that's not a parent charter school company. That is a funding source.
Correct.
In the real estate world, we call it hard money lending. So these people it's not money they're holding. They're charging to hold that money, is what I understand them to be.
Yes, they do pay interest on the money that.
High interest.
Correct.
And so I don't want, with people with good intention trying to do good for students, this is the finance end is what will end up closing a school. So I have concerns about finances. If we took, let's say the long-term subs are working, but we need to find teachers for best practices. If we put in teacher salaries into that budget, what would how does that change the figures? Because then you're talking much more dollars exiting, and it looks like we're struggling already.
Without looking at numbers, I would have to probably agree with you, Mrs. Miller, that if we replaced the long-term subs with full-time certified teachers, that would have a huge negative impact on the budget.
Expenditures exceeding revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When is this coming to us? Do I have time for more questions at a later date?
So it does need to come to the board for a vote on February 28th due to statutory language. I want to make sure I provide you all with the correct information and have an opportunity to explain that if you all choose to non-renew, we have to provide the school 90 days of notice prior to the end of the school year, which will be March 1st.
You said there's some information that was found out outside of the review committee, but you also said the votes to renew had a caveat of things. Can we have have we sent us copies of that?
I have not provided you the copies of that because it's not a compiled list of all the departments.
Okay.
It is, but we do have some from finance, we have some from ESE, and we have some from certification.
I would like to see what your committee, who said we're going to renew this, but we'd like to see things happen. I would like to see that list. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Sharpless?
I was wondering if Wes could speak to this. I know during the presentation, it was mentioned that you had a conversation with the Charter Review Committee. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think I heard this. What it means for our district if we don't renew, or versus a 1 year, a 2 year, or a 3 year. Legally, what does that mean for us? I was just wondering if you could recap briefly what you mentioned to the committee.
And especially in the financial world. What we've discovered through the years with regard to charter schools is that politically they have received some favor in Tallahassee and nationally through the years. And so you can go up if you wish to non-renew or terminate a charter school. That is a tough row to hoe, except when the rationale for it is financial. That is one area where the State Board of Education and previously the Cabinet have listened carefully to what districts have said. So we know that it is difficult when you wish to non-renew or to terminate a charter school. So we went through that stuff pretty thoroughly, and we will also go through that pretty thoroughly when we make this presentation to the school board. And I'm glad you asked the question. I wanted to point out that Charter School Capital is a lender. They're a commercial lender, and they lend to charter schools. We're all watching right now as a society, as people find themselves in financial difficulty because their living on credit. Credit card companies charge usurious interest rates, and it's not a question of paying back principal. It's a question of whether you can whether you can maintain the payment on the interest. And I think that is a reality that is present here. And if a school is relying on borrowed capital to maintain a fund balance, I have an idea that ultimately the accountants and the auditors are going to pull the plug on that. So if in fact this fund balance is based on revenues that are either borrowed or are non-recurring, those things that we're going to have to pay attention to, and in time, as things unfold, that may be it may be a problem for the school. Now, that said, I think the one important thing to consider is the statute does talk about long-term charters. And it tells you that in certain circumstances, charters are entitled to or should be given long-term contracts, 15 years. This school does not fit under that statute. So this is one where we have the option to look at shorter terms. I will tell you that if you try to renew a charter school for 1 year, that puts you in the position of having to start looking at non-renewal immediately upon renewal. It really does not give much time to try to solve problems and improve. So I think that's why the Charter Review Committee has looked at 2 and 3 year contracts there. Whether the school would agree to that, I have no idea. They've asked for a 15-year contract. My impression was that I don't know that there was anybody on the Charter School Review Committee who was interested in investing in that length of time based on the current difficulties. Candy, do you know what the current enrollment of the school is?
They're sitting at about 290 students.
290. And if you look, they've included projected enrollments. They based their budget on projected enrollments of 350 for the next 3 years and going up to 500 over the next 15. And so that's a question as well.
And the budget that they provided did have the funds commingled rather than separated. And we did ask the CPA to update the budget so that the funds were not commingled, just to have a better indication of the budget matches.
So there are a lot of issues here that have been scrutinized closely, and once again, it is a high bar if you want to terminate or non-renew a charter school, but this is one where there are enough questions, enough red flags, I guess, if you will, that have run up the flagpole that suggest it's worth closely monitoring and making hard decisions based on facts and trying to get emotion out of the conversation as much as possible. But we'll have a more in-depth presentation about the factors that go into it. And if you have, I know several of the board members have been through non-renewals and terminations before and have seen the gyrations and the difficulties that are associated with that, the costs, both in terms of money and in terms of political capital. So we'll have those conversations very carefully, but if you wish to give me a call and go through individual questions and circumstances, I'd certainly be open to that.
And I got one additional question for Superintendent Hyde. Will this be brought back at the work session on the 28th or straight to the board meeting? All right, thank you.
Okay, my mic is on, I believe. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I didn't realize they were only at 290 right now. Do we expect that they'll have more than a 20% increase by next school year? Because it looks like they're projecting 350 for the 23-24 school year.
Based on the fact that they do provide transportation, I see that, where they're eliminating the transportation as a barrier for the population of students that they serve. It is feasible to say they could potentially reach the 350.
Okay. Is that their current enrollment cap is 350?
No, their current enrollment cap is 290.
Okay, so it would come back to us again for an increased enrollment cap?
No, and if the application is
right.
approved and it goes through contract negotiations and they come back at 350, that would be their cap.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that I think it was Dr. Allen that asked about the organization that bought the building, if they'd be interested in leasing back. They came out with a pretty excited statement this week about being able to expand their classrooms at their school to be able to have increased security, making a new office suite. They're already working on designs, I believe, of how they're going to be using that building as soon as they gain access back to it. So it sounds, at least from the murmurings in the area, that will be unlikely because they've got some big plans over there. So that's all I had.
Mr. Bridges, I don't know if you're a carryover or you still have comment.
Oh, that was it. Yeah, I wanted to speak about the charter school capital funding and the question of whether they were relying on borrowed money to reach their end fund balance, and to talk about the enrollment as well.
Ms. Miller?
I have a question that the chair brought up with building. So we've had another charter school with similar issues finding a building. And in the end, the students, once it gets out that there's not a building in place, or different than we've had one charter school have a building fund, raise capital, and had the plan to the public that they're going to go here, they're going to build their building, and they've done that. Another charter, I've sat here and heard their intent for a building. It never happened, and slowly kids started leaving that school until they were less than probably 15 even enrolled. So what are the rules with charter maintaining or securing the building within that contract period?
Unfortunately, there isn't a requirement. They have to notify us 30 days prior to school starting where they're going to locate and provide us a copy of the new lease.
Can you you don't have to name the school, can you remind me what happened to that school that could not, are they even around anymore?
Yes,
Okay.
so the school that you're referencing did land a location. They did have to delay their start of school. They
Okay.
started after Labor Day, but they are fully functioning and
Okay, good.
they have students.
But there's no, what's their student?
Their student population is around 17, 18
Students.
students, yes.
Okay, that's a concern for building. I can ask later. Thank you.
Ms. Amato, you're in the clear. There are no further questions or comments at this time.
All right, I'm running.
Thank you very much for doing your due diligence. Thank you, board members. At this time, we are running slightly ahead of schedule. I would still recommend that we go ahead and take our scheduled break. We will have lunch from 12 to 1, and then we will go to closed session, if I recall correctly. We'll return to open. We will then immediately subsequently go into closed session for attorney-client session, and then we'll come back at approximately 1:30 to finalize the three last topics before us today in today's workshop. So, with that being stated, we can conclude. We can go to. Thank you.
Hit the gavel.
Welcome back to our Valentine's work session for February 14th, 2023. And we will now recess this meeting to go into our attorney-client privilege session. And I believe, Wes, you have to give a little spiel.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We announced earlier at the last meeting that the need for an attorney-client session pursuant to Florida Statute 286.011, which says that the school board can meet privately with its counsel to discuss matters that are currently in litigation for the purposes of settlement negotiation and litigation strategy. There are two matters that I wish to bring to your attention. I think that this should be fairly quick. As we've gone over before, these meetings are closed to the public. But we do have a court reporter. We should be having a court reporter.
She's in the other room.
They're moving her.
Okay. Then we need to, I'll wait to finish that till she gets here.
Thank you. And we have concluded our attorney-client privilege session, and we will be moving on to the rest of our work session agenda. Superintendent Hyde?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to wait for staff to return. Hopefully they're making their way.
It's here. It's in your, but they switched us.
Are they on their way back? Are they on their way back?
I think they're also working on reloading them because it's only 2 pages per person.
Yeah, so I was in the process of sending a message to Mr. Bellows and to Heather Jenkins requesting, Mr. Bellows?
Everybody got, yes, the hard copies.
There, it's only one
Right.
school. Okay.
So we just can't see any other
Nope.
schools.
Was that on purpose?
Jason, could you get with Ms. Jenkins right away? In the board docs, only one school is reflected for each board member. We need all of their schools. You can address it when you address the board. I swear my mic's not on. I mean, it's, because it's on. There we go. Okay. All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, staff members, and community members, thank you for being here. At this time, we'll resume our open session for workshop. Under budget and staffing, the first item we have before us is the school staffing plan updates. This will be presented by Mr. Bellows, Senior Manager for Staffing and Finance, and Heather Jenkins, Associate Superintendent and our Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Bellows, there's been some questions from the board. Let's start with that. Each one of them had an attachment here in board docs, but it only reflects one of their schools. Do you want to address that and when they can expect to see a copy of each one of their schools?
Sure. So they currently have, I provided a printout copy, so you should have a printout copy, but if you click on the actual school name, it should bring up a drop down, and then you should be able to change the school within the document itself. Hopefully. If it's a PDF, then it won't work.
It won't.
Okay, so we can, yeah. So it has to be in the Excel form, so we can get that fixed for you, but you should have a paper copy of it. Okay, so that's all the attachment is.
Thank you. We'll get the file. Ms. Winchester will send the file on my behalf to the board members.
Okay. So we have quite a few slides to go through. As Mr. Hyde pointed out, I'm the Senior Manager of Staffing. Mike, for those of you who may not know, we handle all the school allocations, and then also position control for the entire district. So the very first title slide, I have on there that all intended staffing allocations are dependent on available funding. It's super important to know. Obviously, we have this idealistic staffing model, but everything is dependent on funding and how much money we do actually have available to us. I know Mr. Pitts, when he's presented before, said that one teacher at every single one of our schools is almost $10 million. So that's kind of what I just wanted to restate for all of you that, you know, it's the magnitude of staffing is pretty big in most cases. So also as we move forward, we're going to talk about how we're in a little bit of uncharted territory for Polk, not necessarily for everyone, because some school districts are currently doing what we're enacting. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question with your first statement.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Staffing allocations are based on budget, but there are guidelines for staffing allocations.
Correct.
So we can't say you don't get staff because we have no dollars.
Correct. Correct.
Well, that's what I heard, so I
Okay,
wanted you
I
to clarify
apologize.
that.
Yeah, no, I apologize, no. So correct, we have, class size laws and there are certain requirements that we have to meet. But we do have, in staffing plan, every single, and even previous models of our staffing plan do say that it is based on funding. But we'll talk about that as we go through. And then, as I was saying, we are kind of venturing out with new models that we're taking on, and then obviously revamping our current model. So we are still trying to develop as we go. So there are things that I might present that may change in the future, but this is the roadmap and where we're trying to get to eventually. So the first slide, this is the staffing plan document, should have been provided to you in the PDF form. So the entirety of the staffing plan, I'm not going to show it in the slide because it's, I think, 40 pages. It used to be 80. So we consolidated it. But there are certain changes in the beginning that are just these first few bullet points, like formatting changes, removal of watermark, pictures, miscellaneous pictures, consistency in the headings and different sections. So updating the years throughout. Those are just general changes and updates that we would have needed to make. And the main changes that are actually that we're going to talk about a little further are going to be the appeals process and then the singularity model staffing plan. So those are what the next slides are about. But the first few on here are just kind of updates and realigning the staffing plan, since it kind of hasn't been revised in a while, to just what we're currently practicing. So the first one they're going to talk about is the removal of the appeals process. So historically, we've evaluated enrollment changes at reappointment time when we're projecting for the next year, and that's pretty much it until 8th day. So then once the 8th day count comes, we reevaluate the actual enrollment that's arrived at the school. We make any adjustments we may need to, and then don't revisit it at all throughout the entire year. So the way that the schools would advocate for positions were through an appeals process. It's very lengthy, it's cumbersome, and a lot of times if a position is appealed for, it may not get even a decision until 2-3 weeks out, just on the nature of the process. So we're moving to a new process where we're going to reevaluate the staffing at different points in the year. Once at reappointments for projections for next year, again at 8th day, similar to what we have been when the enrollments have been confirmed, and then again at Survey 2, which is usually after winter break. So we're going to try and follow an FTE model, and we'll kind of get a little bit more into that in the later slides, why we're going to go that route. But at these times, and like I said, since we've always kind of had the appeals process, we're going to reevaluate how we go about actually letting the schools advocate for those positions. But those will be the certain times when we're going to be looking at enrollment changes.
If I may, Michael, let me interject here for a moment. Board members, please don't misconstrue the fact that there are still opportunities for schools to receive or retain existing staff. Those conditions will persist as we continue to expand academy programs. So, for example, if we were to add a new academy program to a high school or to a middle school, that would come with additional staffing. They would receive that staffing enhancement for 3 years. This is the proposal that we've provided. And at the end of that 3rd year, they must have the FTE to sustain the program. We're not talking about students moving from within the school into the academy. That's not the same thing. They must market and attract new students to that campus by virtual school transfers that would then make the program sustainable over time. It doesn't mean students within the same school cannot apply to the academy and attend. But at the end of 3 years, if the FTE has not grown to match the staffing allocation, then they will lose those staff. And historically, that's not been our case. We continue to put staff into schools and the entire time, our intent has been to grow academies, and yet we've actually had academies decline in enrollment, but retain large numbers of additional staff that other programs do not benefit from. Ms. Cunningham.
So if I run an academy, and this year I have 12 students, let's say, I'm making up for 20 students, whatever. Right, and then I was able to attract, let's say, 5 more from internally. If the school is able to open up their enrollment for 5 more, does that accomplish the goal?
As long as the enrollment for the campus grows.
The campus grows.
Correct.
Okay,
But
because
the academy program cannot simply just take students from within the school campus.
I understand then nothing, okay, all right, thank you.
There are other opportunities for schools, for example, as I mentioned earlier today with Haines City. With Haines City's projected growth over the next 2 years, while they may on paper, due to their current enrollment, appear to lose administrative staff and/or a guidance counselor, we would retain them there for the next 2 years to support that school body and population that we know is going to grow into those portables until they can be reassigned into the new high school. It's a common sense approach to how do we staff schools. But to Mr. Bello's point, one of the problems that we had as a school district was we've had legacy programs and legacy enhancements to schools and with very little follow-through at the end. We also, in our previous school allocation model, if you were given a dean of discipline, the high school, for example, was allowed to convert that to an assistant principal's position, but then the school district had to pay that difference. There was no request, there was no appeal. It simply said, if I choose to do this, the school district will pay the difference. And that's what happens, is so we convert positions, and then 5 years later, we get a new administrator, and then lo and behold, they say, well, I didn't get the same staffing as everybody else. Yes, you did, but historically, other people have cashed in those positions and converted them into new roles. We're not going to keep funding that. So this is basically our ability to right-size and reevaluate every campus based off their actual FT enrollment or specificity of needs. Clearly, EL students, special education students receive additional enhancements due to the specificity of their nature of their disability and/or supports that are required. So we exclude them traditionally from the conversation. But I didn't want anybody to walk away saying, there's no way for a school to get additional staff, because that's simply not the case. It's just we've taken away a very cumbersome appeal process that we had embedded previously that went through the regionals and went through everyone else. And quite frankly, I think at times put schools at odds with each other because there's only so many available positions due to our budget. So, Ms. Wyatt. Oops, sorry. Ms. Miller.
That's from a previous.
Ms. Wyatt.
So as you talk about the FTE I understand the goal is to be able to have the FTE dollars to support additional units. What happens if we're looking at they're attracting them from XYZ Academy, now they're going to PDQ Academy? Will we be looking at where the enrollment is based on, because obviously if you have the students to support the academy, even if they came from within the high school, it may be a different academy that needs to lose units.
That is correct.
So is that process being built in? Okay, thank you.
It'll look systemically, it'll also look internally.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sharpless?
Are we looking at weighted FTE specifically or in our CTE programs? Since they're bringing in more dollars, are they in our staffing plan, or is that factored in at all?
No. We base it off of the base FTE allocation because there's no guarantee of the weighting. That's commensurate with student completion. For example, just like with AP, the teacher gets additional dollars in funding for their classroom if the students pass with a commensurate score. There's no way we cannot budget assuming everyone will pass. And so based off that, we go based off of the actual FTE allocation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Allen?
So, the language on the previous appeals process, inefficient, cumbersome, lengthy, how many did we typically have? And
every school would ask for something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's no longer, so that window from reappointments, which happens in March, to the 8th day, so there's not an opportunity to appeal moving forward?
So there's two other opportunities that occur within both BudgetCom and DataCom, but those are not included in the appeals process. And you and I discussed those the other day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I think that's all I have.
And I'll clarify, DataCom is when schools will come and share their school's performance in their performance indicators. If a school comes and says at that time that they believe, let's say a school has seen a 42% improvement in overall third grade reading proficiency from the baseline assessment to the mid-year assessment of FSA. And they believe that they could see further improvement. if they could reduce their class size and get another reading interventionist. They'd have to provide data at that time in real time to justify the request. Moving forward, everything has to be justified based off actual data and information related to the program, related to student specificity of needs. And we are prioritizing where those dollars will go. Some requests are just that, a request. It's a wish list. Others are absolutely directly tied to student outcomes and student academic performance and/or behavioral needs, and so those would get prioritized over others.
Yeah, and I think in this one, and I appreciate the model. I was just curious where you may have a leader, school-based admin that could, based on their experience, see that, well, that projection is going to change, it's going to go up, right? So then they cut units, right? In a sense, or units are cut, and maybe they've lost, a great teacher in a sense. So then when that 8-day count comes, they're based on their experience, they knew that, if you get what I'm saying on this situation. So what I don't want us to do is leave admins in a place where they've lost teaching units, and
I do.
And then trying to get those units back at the 8-day count.
Go ahead, Heather.
If I may, when we do our initial projections, we work with a large team of individuals, and that includes the regionals and our deputy superintendent of instruction. We look at several years prior. We also look at potential growth. We work with our student information system. We work with facilities. And then Mr. Bellows comes up with the projection. Once we have those, we go over them with the regionals who have been in contact with their principals, and he sets the allocations based on that. At the 8th-day count, that's our double check to make sure, did we have extra growth in one area or less growth in another? And the way the appeals process had worked before, it was an email system. So the principal would fill out an appeal. It would go to the principal, or go to the regional. Then it would go to Mr. Bellows. He would pull a lot of data together and then distribute it to an appeals team, which is why it took so long, in order for us to have everything we needed. So now what we're going to do is we will pull the numbers based on enrollment, and we will do an initial projection, and then we'll pull that team together all at once to discuss what needs to be added, shifted, moved, to kind of clean it up and make sure that we're more efficient with it. And of course, if we have exponential growth mid-year, that's absolutely something we'll take a look at.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the energy on this. I'm curious, will we be able to see how many moving forward, like with this new process, at the 8-day count, how many lost units, and then how many had to bring units back? And do we have that from last year?
We do track that.
Yeah.
We track movement, yes, sir.
Okay.
But we very seldom do we retract positions at the 8-day count and move them. And that's something our school district has not been comfortable doing. So you could have, let me give you a different example. You could have 3, again, we assumed based off my, personal opinion, personal reflection, that I'm going to need 3 kindergarten teachers. And each one of those kindergarten classrooms opens up and each have 10 students in them. We would absolutely, under normal circumstances, and most school districts would do this, at 8-day count, they would eliminate one of those positions and transfer it to another school that does require another position. We have not historically done that as a school district, and that's why we are largely overstaffed across the entirety of the district. Other times, the numbers don't make sense to consolidate and to move because the numbers are too tight. You don't really have the ability. You end up with very small class sizes across 3 or 4 sections of teachers, but there's not enough students there to stay under the class size cap, or we may feel for that school in particular, given their circumstances, we don't want to constrict those again. But at the same time, we're adding more positions elsewhere. So as a school district, we've got to put some controls in place. And with respect to our building administrators, I think the process that they've defined is a far more thorough process, which looks at historical data, looks at actual enrollment, and will allow us to allocate our resources best that way, in real time. And so, for example, Ms. Castle's department, she provides a lot of ancillary services to students through the LEAs. They're assigned to either an individual school or multiple schools, depending on their caseload. We have flexed up to 9 positions this year, knowing that the number of students we need to service will grow. But those individual positions have not been fully filled yet, and as the needs arise, we will fill the position and reassign them to a caseload of students. So it just makes more sense. But from a budgeting perspective, those 9 positions will be there, and if they're not utilized, they go back into the general budget at a later date to offset additional costs elsewhere.
Yeah, and I recognize the challenge. I mean, we talked about this yesterday, that, we are the second fastest growing in the state of Florida within the last 2 years, next to Miami-Dade. So 10,000 increase for them, 5,000 for us. So I definitely understand and see that. So I appreciate the new system here.
Ms. Fields.
I had a couple of questions. One of them, you made the statement that we are largely overstaffed. Can you elaborate on that, please?
I can. We do not have a significantly large number of our classroom sections that are at or exceeding class size. And so if you were to look across the system in its entirety, again, in individual classrooms, it may not seem, or individual schools, the numbers are not there. But when you look at 6th grade in its entirety, when you look at a grade level in its entirety, and the number of students that are being served by the number of staff, the average class size ratio makes it seem as if we could actually consolidate more positions. But because these students exist in pockets across the district in different schools, we can't consolidate those students. But we are overstaffed as a school district. And this is where zoning and other factors have to be addressed so that we can maximize our ROI. We are operating schools well under their overall capacity, and we have other schools that are well over their capacity. By redistributing those students, the average would change for those individuals, and we could consolidate staff in a much more meaningful way and reallocate them differently, which would allow us to better serve our students in the end. So that's the best explanation I can give you. I can give you some examples of schools. For example, we have one right down the street, Stevens, where the average class size is considerably smaller than it is in other commensurate elementary schools. Now, part of that is we have a comfort with that because we also know that we can get more one-on-one attention with those students in a smaller classroom environment. But it's not the same as another classroom. We could easily consolidate some of those grade level classrooms and free up a position. But we made a conscious decision this year not to do that, to better support those students and their needs, given their data and the history of the academic performance on that campus. So I hope that's making sense. So when you look at the total number of students by the total number of teachers, yes, we are overstaffed based off the ratio. But again, the way we're zoned and the way we support our campuses, some campuses are much closer to the class size cap, and some campuses are much lower than the class size cap.
It does make sense, and I was basically going to say that it all depends on the area.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is necessary to benefit the students. So thank you for that answer.
That's why we think this process works, is it allows us to address students in real time and their needs. And again, that's why I tried to clarify, and I'm sorry if it's become a belabored conversation here and just in slide 2. But I don't want people walking away saying schools cannot appeal for additional staff. They can. However, there's a different process in place now, and it's actually going to be better streamlined, and it'll be done much earlier in the school year versus much later. To your point, Dr. Allen, none of us want to wait till 8-day count. If we're watching numbers climb and we know we're going to need an additional kindergarten section, that's typically where we see a lot of change. We want to do that earlier, because the longer we allow students to sit in that classroom, the more disruptive it becomes for the families. If I get complaints, and you would not think that you get complaints about adding staff to a school, but you do, because my child has been with that teacher now for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, depending on the hiring cycle and how long it takes us to add a teacher to a campus. And now I have to take 2 classrooms that are oversized and somehow pick a group of students out of those classrooms to move into a new teacher's classroom. We always ask for volunteers. You do not get the number that you need. And then you start asking students to move, and parents, rightfully so, call and email and say, why does my child have to move? Why can't somebody else's child move? But somebody has to move. And over time, it typically resolves itself. Our principals do a very good job, actually, of managing this process. But it does become a disruption for our families. So the sooner we can recognize that a school is on a trajectory where they're going to exceed their class size and we need to pop, I call it popping a section, right? They qualify for an extra unit. We want to make that happen as quickly as we can. So it's the least disruptive transition for everyone. And I have Ms. Miller. Sorry, ma'am.
I'm changing it a little bit, but it has to do with this. So, and I know this has to do with size. What's a half of media specialist?
So schools have the opportunity to either fund the rest of a media specialist, so a full library media specialist position with Title I funds, or it will turn to a media para. But we allocate 0.5, so they have that flexibility.
Do schools have, do principals have negotiating power and discretionary units? Because some have zero, but a couple of these schools, from their academics side, if I was the principal, I would want a discretionary unit to push in support when needed.
So the allocation of a discretionary is
Right.
based on enrollment.
So if you have a lower enrolled school, but they're high need, how do we fill that support?
It'll have to be on a case-by-case basis. But if they don't meet the need for a discretionary, or if they don't meet the enrollment threshold for a discretionary unit, then they wouldn't be allocated a discretionary unit.
But we do have lower enrolled schools with high levels of need.
But
Superintendent?
Those are also addressed through Title I. They're also addressed through DA. So if that school is a DA school, there are required additional supports and interventions that have to be provided. So they do get those enhancements by virtue of that. They also get additional allocation of Title I funds.
Okay, so I'm hoping that's where we can make it up, because if I was a principal trying to avoid DA, I would not want to not have a discretionary unit. But that answers my question. Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting topic, and I think it's worth exploring more, quite frankly. A discretionary unit is not going to have the impact that many of us believe it's going to have, because the sheer number of students who require additional intervention and or supports is going to be incredibly large. So you have to look at students and differentiate them based off of where their actual skill set needs are and how frequent that intervention has to be provided. So a discretionary unit is we allocate units based off academic performance needs, not necessarily just by, like, we provide a standard through enrollment, but then those schools, to your point, that are academically fragile receive additional enhancements through other means. For example, Ms. Barnes and her team do an amazing job of evaluating the school's performance and adding coaches, interventionists, and other positions to make sure that they have the actual number of resources they need to be impactful. But if you have a school with 600 kids and you have one reading interventionist, they're just not going to get the support and intervention that they deserve on a daily basis or a regular basis to make a difference.
Can they use discretionary units to hire, like we used to do, the I don't know what we call them, the permanent substitute, instead of pulling support teachers or inclusion teachers to cover classrooms, where we had the permanent sub at the school? Is that a discretionary unit, or can that be funded some other place? You know what I'm saying?
So the only thing that we use discretionary units for are interventionists, coaches, guidance counselors, and then deans. So the schools should have their own sub-budget.
The substitute budget it's been maintained district-wide for several years. Prior to my arrival here, we used to actually charge the schools whenever they had a substitute. So now we, using Kelly Services, have a district-wide management of that. There are certain schools, we have a pilot sub
That's what we call them, pilot subs.
Which is your at-school. We have a process for that. It's, we go through an evaluation to look at how many absences they've had, how many absences they typically run, the ability to fill that position through Kelly, and if it's feasible, we can add that position to mitigate the situation.
Do we add that, or is it a employee through Kelly that serves as a pilot sub, or
It's one of our employees.
Can you send me what that requirement is? Because I'm interested, because I think schools would, because of my background, I hear way too many calls of these kids got no inclusion hours because I've got to cover other classrooms. And I don't know that our schools are asking for pilot subs. Do you know what I mean?
It's not something that we've done prevalently
Right.
across the district. It was done more so in the past.
I'd be interesting getting with ESE to find out how many inclusion hours in some of our schools that we're not getting based on support needed for other rooms, because that might define the need for the pilot sub. Thank you.
You're good, Mr. Bellows.
Okay. So the next one is a shift from differentiating the allocations between elementary, middle, and high to more of a singularity model. I've coined it. So whereas one elementary school who's at 1,000 might not ever get another assistant principal just based on the old staffing plan, you have a high school that's at 1,000 that might get 3. So we've reallocated the units based on enrollment alone instead of differentiating between elementary, middle, and high. And then the thresholds are there on the slide. So the next one, assistant principal 2s. So they've been removed from the staffing plan and they'll no longer be allocated to the schools. This mostly impacts middle schools because those were directly allocated, and then, as Mr. Hyde mentioned, deans were typically allowed to convert to an AP2, but they will no longer be applicable for that situation.
Mr. Bellows, please explain where they're going and why.
So we are reallocating the admin staff to the elementary schools because historically the elementary schools never got an additional AP despite their enrollment. So you have schools that are over, like I said, 1,000 that only had 1 AP. So now we're redistributing those units throughout the entire district to make it more equitable among all of the different schools.
But why the AP2s?
So the AP2s did not have any authority to do any evaluations. So they were essentially still a dean and operating in the dean capacity, so they couldn't operate as an assistant principal with specifically evaluations. So by eliminating the AP2s and in essence elevating them to an AP1, they now have that AP status to be able to conduct those evaluations and assist in the actual admin at the school. Secretarial units, those will be different, but there's no change to the allocation. We're just identifying what their responsibilities are. So every single secretary either was a principal secretary or a school-based secretary, and then we identified the different months. We're changing them now so they will have a specific job description for a finance secretary of 11 months, a registrar for 12 months, which was historically our TO, terminal operators, and then we also have the school-based 10-month secretaries. So for our specialized programs, we've removed the programmatic staffing. So what that means is the staffing plan identified that regardless of your enrollment at a specialized, so your IBs, your Cambridges, your CFAAs, your Summerlin, regardless of what your enrollment is, you would get this number of units, this number of APs, this number of teachers, but it didn't matter what their enrollment is. So we've eliminated that, and we're saying each of them will automatically get a head of program or the head of school for IB or a commandant for Summerlin. They'll get a school-based 10-month secretary, and then that says 2, it should be 1. 1 clinic LPN if the campus is over 1 mile from the home school for situations like your CFAA. Enrollments of the programs in conjunction with the home school will determine the units earned. So, for example, you're going to combine your school A and then your school A IB. And if that earns you 4 counselors, then 4 counselors will be allocated to the school, and then this principal will have the flexibility to say, I want 2 of you to work half-time for school A, and then the other half for school A IB. Or they could say 1 full counselor will go to school A, or school A IB, and then the rest of you will be school A, just the general population. So the principals will then have that flexibility to use whatever allocation is earned through the combined enrollment.
So who is the ultimate decision in that? According to this, it would be the principal.
The principal.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Because, Ms. Cunningham, they're using their existing allocation.
I got it. Just want to be clear, as people listening.
So this slide just basically shows that we're no longer automatically allocating these units to these programs. These are the ones that were only listed in the staffing plan. So if one was left out, it just means it was not specified, which is another reason why we're going through this process and making everything equal and equitable. Just because it doesn't say that they're not going to be automatically allocated a counselor does not mean they won't be allocated one. It's just going to be based on enrollment for the entire school. So where we see Bartow IB would have automatically, regardless of enrollment, been given one AP 11-month, a 10-month secretary, a resource specialist, or a guidance counselor, an 11-month secretary, and then a certain amount of units, even if they only had 100 students. So now we're changing that to say whatever your enrollment is that you generate, you're going to get your head of program or your head of school and your, that should actually say a 10-month secretary, but a secretary, 10-month secretary, and then whatever you generate moving forward with your enrollment.
Unless the administration chose to flex a position over to provide additional supports.
Correct.
Ms. Wyatt.
So if a school has multiple of those programs, is there a minimum enrollment for each program to have the head of school position?
So right now, the head of school program has already been capped. So there's one per high school at this time.
Okay,
With the
except
exception
for
of
Bartow.
Bartow, who, because of the conversation we had with the board, we landed at a head of school or head of program for Bartow IB, and because of Summerlin Academy, they retained a commandant. So it is different. And
But they
especially-
also have a head of program.
Correct. They have a separate head of program that oversees all other academies and career tech ed programs.
And so does Haines City has the same setup with a head.
I don't recall any cities. Mr. Bellows is saying.
So every high school should have a head.
So the IBs still have a head of school and a head of program, but Cambridge just get a head of program.
That's not my recollection at all.
Okay.
Mr. Bellows?
Because that's what the sheets are saying.
Yes, so every high school will get a head of program for their academies regardless of whether they have an IB, a Cambridge, or a CFAA. Then the additional program of the CFAA or the IB, regardless of what campus it is at, will also get a head of program to oversee that program.
So these then may not be completely accurate, is what I'm.
No, let me rephrase. These are accurate. This is specifically for the program. So for Winter Haven, Cambridge, they will receive a head of program and a 10-month secretary.
Right.
They also receive, which is not reflected here because we're not talking, this is only for Cambridge. As a school, they also receive that 11-month AP who oversees all other academy programs.
Okay.
So they still get that programmatic enhancement that the board agreed to last year.
Okay, but there, it's listed as an AP for some schools and a head of program for other schools?
At a program we reserved for Cambridge, for IB, and for Summerlin. Those were the three programs that the board agreed because we wanted a different title.
Right. I just, when you look at the spreadsheets, it says head of school or head of program for, like Bartow's has a head of school for IB, they have a head of program and a commandant.
That could have been an error on our part. Head of
Main
program
cities.
is at CFAA, head of school should be at Winter Haven for Cambridge, if I recall correctly.
For the IBs, we use head of school, and then the head of program would be for all the other programs listed, is how we have it. We can change it.
Correct.
We can change it. For consistency, it should be
Correct,
changed to
yeah.
head of program.
Okay,
Head of school.
but what I'm saying is that the spreadsheets that we received show that the IBs have a head of school for their IB program and a head of programs for their academies. Okay, so these are not
I
accurate.
spoke too soon. They do, but so does Winter Haven.
Okay, because that's not reflected in there for the Winter Havens. It shows they only have a head of one head of program, which would be their IB.
So the spreadsheets that you have don't consider the IB programs. So it's only looking at the
They
head
don't
of
consider
program is
Cambridge.
what's on their academy.
They only consider IB. Okay.
So your specialized programs on the actual Excel sheet, because we're limited with our Excel
Mm-hmm.
sheet, it's not going to reflect the two that you get for IB also.
So it does say head of school IB and
Does
has
it?
that reflected
On
in
the-
that,
on
but
the
it
Excel
doesn't for
sheet?
Cambridge, correct.
Okay.
So that's why I
We'll
was
make the
asking.
correction.
Then we'll make the corrections. I didn't realize that I had added that on there for IB.
I'm thrilled that it's just a technical error.
Yes, it's
Don't
just a
worry.
technical error. There was a lot going on.
We spent a lot of time adhering to the directions of the board. You know, the AP2s, it's really important for us to elevate them and move them to the AP1. Because otherwise, really, when you think about it, if they can't evaluate staff, they are exactly the same as a dean. There is no difference between the two of them. Because a lot of your AP2s are still doing, they are not doing necessarily, they're doing some academics, but they're doing a lot of discipline as well. So elevating them to the AP1, we actually get a better, I would say, a better pipeline for future leadership as well, because now they're having to evaluate instruction, provide feedback, learn how to coach others, and mentor, which is a skill set that many of them otherwise would not be able to develop, because they're not put in that position where they could.
Thank you.
Okay, so those are the workups. As we discussed a little bit, just to note, again, several factors may contribute to some discrepancies you might see. So funding, appeal submissions, decisions, enrollment changes, the specialized programs, all of those, even though it says what they were allocated in school year 23, which is what we're currently in, it may not be accurate. It's just what the intended allocation would be with the current staffing plan. And then shows the changes of what it would look like if we were to follow exactly with the next staffing plan. So it's just to show the differentiation between the allocations. So the next piece of this is a site-based model. So it's a pilot program that we're using for 6 of our schools. And it's to shift from the district way of us telling them, here's what your enrollment is, this is what you're going to get, to now we're saying, here's how much FTE you've generated, this is how much money you've generated, you're going to tell us what you want. So it's giving the schools the opportunity to, the principals, to be their own CEO of their own campus. So it gives them the flexibility. So all of the changes that we've talked about up to this point are kind of helping pave the way for everyone to eventually end up at the site-based model. So historically, we've been district-based, which is where we tell them, you have 1,000 students, so you're going to get this, 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 and this, based on the staffing plan. But we're going to shift to the site-based, which is going to be the funding that's actually generated through your FTE. So there are a few differences. Obviously, the flexibility at the school level to allocate the units based on the individual needs at the school. Since we're so large, we recognize that the staffing plan may not work for one school like it does for another school. So this will help alleviate that. It'll help the schools actually see their available budget, how much they're generating. So it gives us a lot more transparency. It will follow the same timelines as the staffing model currently, so we'll true up the funds essentially at Survey 2, similar to how we would verify the enrollment with the current staffing plan, but it's looking at actual FTE instead. So that's one of the main things that's going to be FTE versus our enrollment. So as most of you know, schools funding is generated by FTE. They're weighted differently, so a gen ed student receives a weight of 1.126 for Polk County, which equates to approximately $4,400 per student. If you have a matrix level 5 student, they receive a weight of 5.4, which equates to approximately $21,000 per student. So those variances in those FTE generations will actually be visible and usable at the school level with the new site-based model, and it'll be up to the discretion of the principal. So another example why the shift from enrollment to FTE is prevalent, because we have in some instances where a student may be enrolled at 2 different campuses. Enrollment would count that as 2, so 1 at one school and 1 at the other, so it's 1 full student where they may only be at the school half-time. So your FTE would count it as 0.5, whereas enrollment would count it as 1, so it would be a lot more proficient in being able to determine the needs of the school based on the actual FTE at that school.
Ms. Miller?
I have a question before you get too far away from it.
Sure.
This is something I think is very positive for schools who complain that there's just cookie cutter that they don't fit into. Here's my concern. You just said a 255 matrix gets $21,000 a student. In my years of community advocacy, I could pull site-based budgets where that money did not go to that student. And so I know it goes to the whole, this is a big shift to what we were doing. I just want to make sure there's oversight for the dollars flowing into a school, that they are used not only to fill areas of testing needs, but to meet the needs of the diverse population that those principals have. And I don't know that we've always, and we may have, because I know we've changed how we train and give support. We haven't always trained principals in that. And so some of them struggle with how to use those funds to differentiate in population. So my question is, these are site-based budgets or site-based selections. Who is the regionals oversight? Who is the oversight of this?
It will be the regionals to assist the schools, but we have specific instruction for the schools to communicate with each necessary department. So the very first, we'll get into it, but the very first slide on the actual Excel spreadsheet that they're going to be using to determine their allocations is ESE, and it instructs them they must meet with their either ESE senior manager or the ESE department to determine what those needs at that campus really are.
Because it looks different everywhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they cannot cash in certain positions. I want to make sure we're clear on this. While principals, administrators will have some flexibility with their overall staffing allocation, there will be expectations that are set that, for example, there's a minimum number of ELA teachers they have to hire, a minimum number of math teachers, a minimum number of EL teachers. And so they'll go through that spreadsheet, and then there'll be additional dollars that are provided to them that they can then, or positions that they may be able to flex. And, you know, and Ms. Miller raises a very good point. Sometimes we see that number for the weighted FTE for a student, and a school says, well, I get every one of those dollars. You don't. Because in many instances, we provide itinerant services and supports for those students that the district has to then subsequently pull some of those dollars to offset those operating costs. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, you know, behavioral interventionists, I mean, all of those nurses become quite crucial for us to make sure that we can allocate those funds adequately to provide all the services that that student needs. So a school would not simply say, oh, wow, I got $21,000 for Fred. That's not how it works. They get a portion of that based off what the district's operating costs are for some of the positions that support him or her.
Overall, I think this is a great change and will be helpful, because too many times we hand them a cookie cutter template, it doesn't work for them. My concern is that need has been consistent of the application of the dollars. So thank you for clarifying who's responsible for that.
Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you. I can't tell you how many years I have been asked and requested that we get to this point. For those of our educators out there that are principals and our leaders, they say, hey, you entrust me, you give me the building, you give me the students, you give me the resources, but my hands are tied how I allocate those resources, because every school is different, every campus is different, every need is different based on the students. So I just want to say thank you. This is so refreshing. When I was reading through this last night, I just thought that was amazing, and I'm going to ask as we move on how you chose those 6 schools as pilots, because I thought that was interesting too. They're all over the board, so to speak, but I think it's great. I think if we hire individuals to be our principal leaders in our schools, you know, it's kind of like a mini CEO of their company, and they need to be given the resources and the ability to allocate those based on their individual needs and their student population. So I just want to say this is awesome. I understand it's going to be piloted, right, for this coming year. And then as we go through, you know, and learn what worked and what didn't, then perhaps are we looking to take this system-wide? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, man, so awesome. So awesome. Thank you, sir. Just wanted to commend everybody. Whose idea? Who came up with this? I've been saying that for years. So whoever came up with it, it's amazing.
It has been an effort of love
Okay.
for many of us.
Okay.
Mr. Green and I were very fortunate to be in a school district when we were administrators that did this.
That did this, so you understood.
And so we had a great deal of flexibility, and being in a Title I setting, you know, I had extra dollars. I had supplemental academic instruction, I had other funds, I had title dollars. So I was able, once I filled all of my required positions.
Yes, sir.
I was able to get quite creative with how I wanted to best address the intervention strategies on my campus. Some monies were spent on tutoring, some monies were spent elsewhere. We did some things with substitutes. For example, every teacher, you know, once a month, the entire department would get half a day off to come in and co-plan with their coach. and we would flex the subs throughout the day. And it just took a lot of coordination, but the dollars had to come from somewhere. And they were really appreciative of that because they felt like they were being treated as professionals. They got extra planning time, a half a day of planning. So I think a lot of us come back with that mindset and that perspective of how do we empower our building administrators? And this helps us get away from the double ask, right? I get an allocation, now I feel like I have to feel like I have to develop a compelling argument. So now we're giving you flexibility within your budget to say, okay, how do you best want to approach and problem solve? With the understanding that you're going to be, ultimately, you're responsible.
Right.
You know, the decisions you make, you live or die by. But that's why the regionals, and that's why and to Michael's point, Mr. Bellows' point, excuse me, they'll meet with every single department that signs off. So they'll meet with special education, they'll meet with ELL, they'll meet with everyone, career tech ed and academies. And that way, everyone has their eyes on it and can support them during this initial transition period so that we don't make mistakes that are going to cost us in the long run.
I just want to commend you, Mr. Hyde, and Mr. Green for just doing a tremendous job, because I can tell you how many years I understand. And I mean, but leadership starts at the top.
I think they thought we were crazy when we first started talking.
Probably.
Mr. Bellows has had to reinvent the wheel, that's for sure.
Well, it's going to be appreciated, and you wait till you start hearing information come in from your principal leaders out there, because this is something that I know I've personally been asked for at least 10, if not more years. So kudos to everybody involved. It's going to be so well received. So thank you for being innovative and looking outside the box. So we appreciate it.
Ms. Fields.
I had a similar question to Ms. Cunningham. I wanted to know whose idea this was, and you've answered that. And then my other question is, leadership of the schools, have they been involved in it at all, or how have you guys brought them to the table?
Yes, ma'am, this has been an ongoing conversation with our site-based administrators. There's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. They knew that we were going to pilot it and slowly roll it out. I think many of them are waiting anxiously because, you know, with anything new, there's going to be something that they find that's really enjoyable, and then other moments of frustration, like, why did I ask for this? I'm taking on more responsibilities. But I would leave, Mr. Bellows and Ms. Jenkins, do you want to highlight, I mean, we've talked about it at principals meetings, we've talked about it in other areas. We selected a pilot program, ASBA's aware of it, so I would say we've done a pretty good job communicating, conveying it to them. And if it were not a sincere interest on behalf of many of our schools, as you know, many of them are kind of requested this type of flexibility, then we may have gone in a different direction. But this is something they're excited about, and I feel very strongly that this empowers them as leaders on their campuses, because they're not cookie cutter. And while the cookie cutter approach is how do we give them positions, internally they then need to problem solve and figure out how to best place those positions to elicit an outcome or an expectation for students. So, but Mr. Bellows and Ms. Jenkins, is there anything else you'd like to add as far as other information we've shared with building principals? And
Yeah, so we've actually provided training to them on how to work the spreadsheet, and they've done their own calculations with a sample school with sample FTE. So they've been through the process essentially for a sample school, and they've had the opportunity to play around with the spreadsheet and see what their allocations might look like if they had that exact population. So it seems like it was, like he said, well received and exciting for them.
Mr. Sharpless.
Thank you, Superintendent. I first got to say I'm excited about this model. I think it's great. What I come to think when I think about it, I wonder the evaluation component. I know we're piloting this in 6 different schools. What determines if this is a successful pilot, and then having this go district-wide? How do we evaluate principals based on this staffing model? Making good decisions and bad decisions, right? Just like you would in a business. Wondering if you had any answers to this.
If they're being allowed to make bad decisions?
Well, no, how you evaluate whether this pilot program staffing model is successful.
So I think it's
to roll it out.
Things. I think, can we adequately ensure that students can receive the instruction that they deserve? Can we ensure that class sizes are appropriate? Can we ensure that school staff feel like they have the resources they need to be competitive? We'll get feedback from our building administrators. I'm sure we'll get feedback from PEA and from ASME and from other groups. about this based off what their impressions are as well. But at the end of the day, it's outcome. I think at the end of the day, if we're going to empower people and say, listen, we're going to let you, not only pick your players, but we're going to let you field your team, and we're going to be there throughout the whole thing. I assure you, there will be no mistakes. Meaning there will not be an opportunity for a school to say, we're just not, and I'm going to pick on Ms. Miller for a moment. A school will not be able to say, we're not going to do special education services this year. We're just going to focus on every kid as if they're being mainstreamed. And we'll cash in all those extra positions and we'll add this, this, and this. That can't happen. There are safeguards in place that prevent that. So I think from an outcome perspective, it's the regionals evaluating from the get-go. It's every single department or associate superintendent reviewing those budgets, critically, providing coaching feedback to staff, to our administrators, asking the question, why do you want to do it this way? Help me understand, because that might be just a breakdown and understanding about how to better support and serve those students. And, so I think it's going to take us 2 or 3 years. The pilot schools are exceptional schools, as you can see. They have exceptional leaders who have shown a willingness and an interest in doing this and being on the front edge. So I think it's just going to take feedback from them and from others to really determine whether or not it's been ultimately been successful. And then if we see an overall reduction in the requests for extra positions, that will be an indication of success as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Miller.
Yeah, I just want to follow up that I don't think principals go out saying they're not going to meet the needs of students, but the way our system is created is they are rewarded if certain students make certain achievements. And in the past, we've had something very similar. And I'm talking probably 15 plus years ago. And I think what we were missing was the site-based support and follow-up through the regionals. Because people are only doing what they know, and I don't know that we were ever good at explaining federal law to some of our principals. And so I think I have great hopes for this, but for someone who lived through the days where it wasn't working as well, I am a little shy of it. So I can't wait for you to show me how successful this program will be.
You're clear, sir.
Okay. So the pilot schools are these listed. Mr. Hyde has answered a bit of why we picked these schools, but we did rely a lot on the regionals and deputy superintendent when these selections were made. So those are some of the reasons why these schools. And obviously we have a wide range, high school, a couple middle schools, and then obviously your elementary schools. So the next few slides, as with everything that we've talked about, it's all in the works, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And today I was working on how to make it better, and we're still working on looking at adding federal units because we're only really discussing local units in this current model. So we're still developing it. So as we go through this, it's really more to show what it looks like and what the flow will be and what it will appear to as it will appear for the principals. So the very first sheet that they will get is an Excel sheet that shows pretty much the instructions for how they're going to fill it out, everything we've talked about, the times that we're going to make our adjustments, the expectation that they maintain good budgets, and then hold back funds, all the intricate details, and obviously this will grow as we go through them, and then the process of how to actually go through these slides. So each one of these slides will be sequential order. So the next slide that we go to will be the first sheet that they'll see, that they'll be able to review their information and then make their allocations. So this is the first tab. Like I said, ESE would be the first tab that they have to work with. So this is probably the slide that has the most going on. This is an example of a school. It's not one that was actually on the list. It's just arbitrary numbers. So we have the FTE that is generated. It's a middle school, so you have 6 through 8 students. The additional funding for each of those ESE at the top, it shows your full district budget, which is the total budget less purchase positions to this point, and then your remaining budget after you've made your selection. You have your actual FTE counts and your enrollments on the right-hand side at the top. And then at the bottom is where they're going to actually make their allocation selections. The left white column next to the title of the position will show you what our recommendation is based on staffing plan. They can choose to follow it. They can choose not to follow it. It's totally up to the school. But we give them a recommendation based on what student population we can see that's actually in the system. So the school will make their selection in the goldenrod, yellowish cells. Once they make their selection, it will total up the cost of their positions, and it will show them how much money those positions cost them, and then they can move on. So they'll move on to the next tab, which is their ESOL tab. It'll calculate out their total FTE. It will tell them any additional funding. So ESOL gets a certain percentage extra, which will incorporate into their additional ESOL funding. It'll project to them approximately how many teaching units they'll need. It'll show them their total budget. At the bottom, it's the same concept. You have your positions, your recommended units, which is based on the staffing plan again, and then their selections, and then it will show them the cost. This will be their instructional tab. It'll be the next tab. So it tells them at the top left their total FTE at their school. On the right-hand side, it shows them the breakdown of those grade levels. We give them a target number to shoot for at the top left, which is the total number of units that they would need to service these students based on class size. And then they'll be able to make their selections. You have your core units K through 5. You've got math, science, English, language, arts, social studies, elementary school, art, music, PE, and so on and so forth. If a non-core class is not listed on here that they want to select, they can obviously indicate other and then type out whichever subject or class they want to potentially add, and then it'll have to go through the appropriate approval process, obviously, if it's adding a new program per se. But they have their option to select whichever position they would want to staff. Next will be administration. Obviously, every school has to have a principal, so that's not really negotiable. And then they'll have their option to pick. Here's our recommendation at the top, and then the number of units that they want. It will total the amount and then tell them the budget that they have left over. Same thing for instructional support. So your counselors, your media specialists, your testing coordinators, your academic interventionists, and your coaches. We give you a recommendation based on the staffing plan. You're able to enter in what you would like, and then shows you your remaining budget. Same thing for your paraeducators. And then you have miscellaneous costs. So obviously you have a substitute budget, you have a custodial budget, your utilities, your phones, an operating budget. We've allowed them to adjust their operating budget. The intent is really to add to their operating budget, but the option is there to adjust that cost. And then a suggested holdback. So we're going to suggest that the schools hold back a certain amount of funds in the event that they gain FTE and need more teachers, or they lose FTE and they have to get rid of some of those funds and return those funds back. So,
I think I would ask one question on slide, either we put it in instructional support or we could include it in that last tab on slide 23 for the teachers to give them the choice of a sub. I don't see that listed, so if there's a way for us to, as we continue to revise and edit these, add that full-time sub as an option for them. Because what I want to avoid is a school saying, well, I know I can get a full-time sub that's not listed here, so I'm going to squeeze it under, I'll make it an academic coach and I'll just use it as a full-time sub. No, let's classify it the right way so we know exactly what they're spending their dollars on, so.
we can have that.
Okay. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you, and I apologize if I missed this, but when you're submitting the numbers, it's based on an average for what one unit costs or one teacher costs, or is it based on who's in your system?
For the cost of each position, it's an equivalency. So
Okay.
we use an average of every single teaching position, and whatever that equivalency comes out to is what we use as the estimated cost.
Okay.
Same for every other position.
So what happens when we have a school that has all very, 30, 40 years in the profession that obviously are at the higher end of the pay scale? I just want to make sure that we're not penalizing schools for being able to maintain teachers for 20, 30 plus years, but also that we're not hurting their budget that way either.
Go ahead, sir.
So it's still being worked out. The intent is that if the school has a higher level teacher, then the teacher will come out of that budget. So the schools are going to have to account for those. There are certain trainings that they're going to go through that educate them on how to best accommodate those types of situations. But it will have to be accounted for in the budget.
Okay.
Most of the accounting for will occur on our end, because to your point, schools that have veteran staff that may qualify, or schools that have staff, it doesn't have to necessarily be a veteran staff, but who have different degree attainment and they're paid commensurately different. It typically comes out in the wash, because every year we onboard about 1,000 new teachers, which drops the overall average. So a lot of the accounting will happen behind the scenes, but by no means will a school level's allocation be impacted based off of, okay, you have too many veteran teachers, so you can't, we're not gonna give you that money. They'll get their actual allocation in that regard. So this is, like he said, it's still a template that's being finalized. But for comfort reasons and for training purposes, we didn't want to overly complicate the process. But you have our assurance that, yes, ma'am, and we will provide that information to you so you know if there's any overages.
Thank you. And I mean, you look at a lot of our higher performing schools and they have maybe 4 vacancies a year, and it's because somebody turned 80 and retired and somebody went on maternity. I mean, it's just, you don't see very many vacancies at those schools. So I want to make sure we're not penalizing them either.
No, ma'am.
So the last tab that they'll have is just a summary view and overview. We selected in this sample just exactly what the recommendation would be, so there is no change to the costs. So everything balances out. But if there was a different cost, if they decided they wanted to purchase an 11-month AP as opposed to a 12-month AP, then you would see a savings on that line and then a cost on the other line, and then it would show you the ultimate cost or savings on the subtotal for the administrative lines. So that's the thought process behind this summary page. And then it's also at the top of that page, it gives you a summary of the summary of each subtotal and how it accounts for your total budget for the school. And that's it.
One of the strategies you may see schools utilize when they cash in a position is using that to pay for additional duty supplements. An extra period supplement, I should say, not the additional duty supplement. So there are a lot of teachers who are willing to forfeit their planning period to pick up an extra class section. That is far cheaper in the overall scheme. You can buy more sections or units or sections of class time by breaking out a salary versus paying an individual because of the way their planning periods and everything else works out. Monetarily, it works out very different. So that's the way we'll work with our administrators to make sure we're maximizing our efficiencies that way. And I think you'll be very pleased with the end result. Okay. Ms. Fields, I saw your hand go up.
Yes, I just want to make a comment.
Let me turn your mic on. I apologize, ma'am. Go ahead, Ms. Fields.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment. This is a big shift, and it's going to take a lot of work and adjustment on everybody's part. And I just want to make sure that it's done with fidelity and with grace. And I really want to emphasize grace because, again, it's a shift. And we're going to have some things that work well and some things that don't. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are doing it to the best of our ability, which I'm sure that we will. And again, keeping the leadership in mind that it's going to be an adjustment for them, an adjustment even for their team. So I just want to make sure that is stated.
Point well taken, and I think that's one of the reasons we started with a pilot group. They then will become mentors to others, and so each year, as subsequently you see more and more individuals coming on board, I think that'll be a really good process for us that will ensure just that. We will be there as a safety net, not a critical partner, but as a safety net to make sure mistakes are not made that otherwise would impair our ability to appropriately serve our students and our schools. So I think, to your point, yes, ma'am, hear you loud and clear, and we will be sure to adequately support our staff and make them feel good about the process that we're doing, because this is really about them. This is about empowering our school-based administrators. And I think many of them have expressed sincere gratitude for this. It's been a long time coming. So,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am. Thank you, sir. I don't see any other questions. You're out of the hot seat. Unless, Dr. Allen, I heard you home. Okay. All right. I thought I heard it. Next is Brian Warren. He's going to be discussing the request for Specialized Student Services and Staffing Update. This is for a request for a new Secretary 2 for 12-month for ESP. And clearly, he's being joined by Mr. Brett Butler.
Mr. Brett Butler will be joining me. This was a piece we want to bring forward to you as a carryover relative to a piece that we'd previously brought to you to make sure you're aware of a position that Mr. Butler needs in his office relative to some other new staff that was brought on in a previous approval. And so I'm going to let him explain its position, its use, and how it will benefit his staff.
Good afternoon. How are you all today? The position is a Secretary 2 position for our community liaisons for working on our truancy. I believe you all received an update from Mr. Hyde last Friday with some of the numbers, some exciting numbers, I think, that we're accomplishing. And the outgoing volume is there. Well, what isn't being shown is the incoming volume from parents calling, saying, please, my child is going to come to school. Can you please tell them not to come by tomorrow? We're going to come to school. So that other side of the house, they're calling our office, that volume is continuing to go up. The paperwork, the letters that are going home, the assisting the schools in the letters is all part of that duty. Any questions? And this is all coming out of grant funds from last year. We just were waiting on the state to finally give us the green light for approval.
Mr. Butler, I do not see any questions at this time. However, if a board member contacts me or you afterwards, please make sure you respond.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Warren. And last but certainly not least, as far as presentations today, we will bring up Carol Matthews for her second tour today. And she will be providing an update on revised internal audit for charter.
Good afternoon. This is just a clerical or administrative task for the internal audit charter to be updated to reflect current changes in statute. So that is what we have here. And then actually, I have it here for information and then was going to bring it back at the February 28th board meeting for you to actually approve. So I don't know if there's any questions.
I am looking. I do not see any as of yet. Any questions, concerns, or comments? Not seeing any. Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This afternoon. Thank you, board members. Thank you, Madam Chair. A lengthy day today, great conversations. I appreciate your time today, and I will turn it over to our chair.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. I will now open the floor for any board member comments, liaison updates for your committees. I think, Sharpless, did you click this for, okay. That was for me. All right, Mr. Sharpless.
Okay. I just want to say I've enjoyed being on the Polk Vision Operating Board so far. I'm in the Infrastructure Working Group. So if anyone has any ideas or anything related to the infrastructure of our county, make sure to let me know. Also, so when I first signed up to do the Value Adjustment Board, I was under the assumption that that was, because in the previous, it was a morning meeting. And now it's been moved to a lunchtime meeting, and that changes my availability. So I believe the correct thing to do is to bring that back and for you guys to appoint someone different than me, and just because I'm not going to be available and I don't think it's fair. But that was my understanding at the time. So I do have something else, but that I would like to just request on the record. If we could have a workshop at some point on our interlocal agreement, because I don't fully understand it. I'm trying, I'm reading it, But I think having our staff come forward and actually explain what the interlocal agreement is, that would help, because I'm getting some comments from citizens just asking us if we're following that. And again, I don't have expertise in that, so I don't feel comfortable answering that. So if we could have just a workshop on our interlocal agreement.
Which interlocal agreement?
The concurrency one. Yeah.
So Ms. Wyatt has requested that we bring somebody in to speak to you as it relates to concurrency. There'll be a presentation regarding concurrency in the near future.
That would be great.
Yes, we are compliant. And we have been answering questions from those stakeholders consistently as they're submitted. But we'll try and bring in, the Department of Education used to have someone, and it used to have a department that would support this, that no longer exists. So we're having to go out to other school districts and really having to rely more heavily on their staff. Mr. Bridges, is assisting with this, trying to find attorneys who might be able to speak to us, but we're also reaching out to facilities directors who have been in their positions for a longer period of time. There are some who are held in very high regard across the state who might be willing to come over and speak to the board and host a workshop. It would be a special workshop on that topic in and of itself.
Thank you. I would like just for the public to be more educated on it, and me myself as a board member, I feel like I should be more educated on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharpless. And my request with that too was that we have someone that can explain not just what we're doing, but what the statute allows. Because I think there may be some things in statute that we could look at doing as well, is my understanding. As far as the Value Adjustment Board, that actually is on my list. Mr. Sharpless is unable to attend, and I believe Ms. Cunningham was the alternate and is also unable to attend. I went ahead and put it on my calendar just so we would know somebody is available. But there are 2 meetings. The first one is at 11:30 on March 31st, which is a Friday. That is an appointment that we have to vote on, so we'll need to bring it back to the February 28th meeting. But if anyone is interested in just jumping to serve on that committee, I'm happy to nominate you for appointment if anyone's interested, because we'll need both a nominee and an alternate, I believe is.
That's what. Are those
Okay.
meetings always on a Friday?
Yes.
They all are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't, once it,
Sorry.
let me turn me on.
You're on now.
I'm on? Okay, so I have the same issue as Mr. Sharpless. I cannot do a Friday luncheon meeting. When I was on it years ago, it was always at 9 in the morning. Didn't matter really which day for me. So I just can't do that with my work and my lifestyle. So I need to give up my alternate. I had no idea when I signed up for it, and then he and I chatted, and I was like, we need to bring it up because that's not fair to the group. So I had asked them to contact Yvette, and see if someone could attend the meeting, because they called me like Thursday, and the meeting was the next day. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So I'm hoping we can get
I don't think we've missed any
appointment?
meetings. When I talked to them, the first meeting is March 31st.
No, the
So-
first one was what was it, 2 weeks ago? He said he couldn't make it. They called me. I said I couldn't come the next day, and I gave them Yvette's phone number and asked them to follow up with her. Did you, I don't know if she told me yes. Okay, yeah, they've already had the first one. Yes, ma'am.
They did have the first one of it? Because
Yeah.
which is March 31st is the first one. So the first one's not for a while.
She told me it was that Friday.
I don't know. I'll follow up again, but when I
Okay.
talked to her, she said the first one was March 31st.
Okay.
But so it's just a 30-minute meeting. Essentially, they appoint those who will be serving as those who are adjusting the values. And then the second meeting is to approve all of those values the work that those appointees have done. Anybody dying to be nominated? Doesn't sound like
I
it.
had my hand up.
Oh, sorry,
but it's
Ms.
not
Fields.
being acknowledged. I have been given the calendar committee, and I have chosen not to serve on that committee. And you know that. And so I would be willing to do the value adjustment. If it's only for a window of 30 minutes to an hour on a Friday, I can do that.
Okay, yes, ma'am. So we'll bring back on, at our February 28th meeting to appoint Ms. Fields as the Value Adjustment Board committee member, and then I'm happy to serve as the alternate if nobody else is jumping to do it. Ms. Miller's just smiling at me, so I think that means yes. And then the second question I have is anyone interested in serving on the calendar committee for this cycle?
So I might be, I just need to know when they meet, once again.
They
Any
are,
idea?
We will issue 2 new dates because, again, the goal is to provide at least one more calendar.
Sure.
So I'll work with Mr. Warren and get those dates for you.
Sure.
I'll get them to the board, and then if it's convenient, then you can join.
I'd love to do that. Thank you.
okay, so Ms. Cunningham will be the member and Ms. Miller is the backup if needed. And that one we don't have to vote on. That one's just an appointment. So I appreciate you all stepping up. All right. Mr. Sharpless, did you have anything else?
That's it, thank you.
Mr. Nolte?
I've had some teachers and paras and things, people come up to me. What is our definition? In other words, who are the community stakeholders? Who and what are they? I was having a hard time defining exactly, because they said, yeah, we see it in different articles, community stakeholders. What do I tell them?
Everyone in the community has a vested interest in public education.
Okay.
And wants to be
So I
involved.
did answer it pretty closely, correctly. And the second question I've heard from several parents and teachers and paras, many of them have heard that when ordering the new books for our schools, anything printed prior to 2014 would not be looked at. Is that clear, or is that true?
I'm sorry?
Anything written before 2014 would not be coming into the library. That's not correct, is it?
Oh, sir.
My goodness, we got so many classics out
There's
there.
nothing in the
No.
law that speaks to that.
Right.
It's entirely possible, if not probable, that there's a great body of literature written before 2014 that would be inappropriate in our schools.
Right.
Absolutely. No, there's nothing in the statute.
But to your
that talks
point,
about
there's
publication.
also a plethora of amazing books and novels and poetry that's been written
Absolutely.
that would be more than appropriate for our schools. So I don't know where that's coming from, but that's absolutely false.
Thank you.
Ms. Fields, was yours just about calendar committee, or did you have something else?
I did. I had something else. I wanted to share that I was late coming to the work session this morning because I had an opportunity to go out to Kathleen High School and the Aviation Academy to celebrate Valentine's Day with all the staff. So we were able to go to every individual room and give them a little goodie to let them know how much we love them and how much we appreciate them. So it was a great day. And Mr. Hyde, I think that is something that could benefit almost every school because they were very appreciative of just that gesture. So
Yes, ma'am.
just a thought.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I want to commend Mr. Jones for being the person who spearheaded that idea along with the support of his staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. That means you can't schedule any more Valentine's Day meetings, Mr. Hyde.
Ms. Fields, Ms. Swish.
Dr. Allen?
Sure. As we're talking about our committee assignments and so forth, I was reading January's minutes from the Central Florida Public School Board Coalition. And yes, indeed. So they were noting their attendance bylaw and were expressing that there were certain school districts that were not in regular attendance. So who is our
I'll have to double check. Hold on just a second.
yeah, board member that's supposed to be attending those meetings?
So going to call out names, are we?
Well, no, not now, but you can obviously send that communication out, and I just wanted to make sure that we are meeting that responsibility in accordance to their bylaws.
I'll double check. I believe Ms. Fortney was on that prior, and
Yep.
they had moved that to being a Zoom meeting. so-
Right, and there was discussion that they would go back to meeting face-to-face,
Okay.
if I remember, I don't know.
But I will be sure to follow up on that and make sure so that looks. So.
I wasn't sure if anybody had reached out to us, because they said that in the in the minutes that they were reaching out to the different districts, and, okay.
Was that yesterday's meeting, though?
No, that was in January's meeting.
Just the minutes for January's.
Because I was on that meeting yesterday, if I recall correctly.
It also may be that they don't have updated, they don't have our updated names of who it is. So we'll double check on that and make sure that they know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Anyone else have any comments, questions, good of the orders? All right, seeing none, this work session is adjourned.